I want to welcome you. I appreciate your taking the time to come today and to honor the life and work of Edward Edinger. And I'll be saying quite a lot about why I have been interested in doing this and working with his work. But I'd like to hear from each of you briefly about what interests you in Edinger and what sort of uses you anticipate for this, personal or professional. As many of you know, I've been working on the collective unconscious for many years, trying to understand its structure and dynamics. And so, of course, it's a natural for me to be interested in Edinger's work. And I, like many of you, have followed him and his work for many years. It was only recently, however, that I began to realize that he was actually more important than I had previously thought. And it has been, and we'll go into this during the day, it has been my increasing awareness of the role of grandiosity, grandiose exhibitionistic energies in human psychopathology. My studies of other traditions have enabled me to come back to Dr. Edinger's work with a fresh eye to see the wider and deeper implications of a lot of the things that he's been talking about. At least it has been enormously helpful to me in rethinking what psychotherapy needs to be, what analysis needs to be, the nature and dynamics of the spiritual task. And it's also given me an opportunity to move to a new level myself in terms of understanding just how hard this individuation process is and just what its costs are. Because today we'll be looking at his general take on this, and I will be, the way he worked, he was not Jewish, but it's intriguing the way in which his method of interpretation, his approach to interpretation of cultural and psychological materials was very rabbinical. That is to say, the thing he loved to do, and those of you that have been studying his work for many years are very aware of this, what he loved to do is take important text and then do a psychological commentary. That's very rabbinical, where you stay with the text. You don't get into your abstractions too much from the text. You stay predominantly with the text, you reflect on it, and you try to glean the eternal significance out of the particular religious or cultural form. Today, that's really, I'd like to just follow his example there, and what I'd like for us to do is to just reflect on his work in that way. And I'm going to be doing a good bit of the work here, sharing my commentary on what I see in what he's doing from a contemporary place. And then we'd like to invite those of you who have insights that you'd like to share to do that at different points in the day as well. Now, what I propose to do in terms of our time is to work intensively this morning looking at the psychic life cycle as he understood it. We all have delved, or at least most of us have delved in some depth into this particular text. Again, this text is so rich that you cannot exhaust it by coming back to it time and time again. Every time I come back to this text, something else hits me, something that I had missed or something that I'd underappreciated, something that I did not really grasp the depth of what he was doing. So we're going to work with this round. This book, this Ego and Archetype, really contains the most clear exposition of the psychodynamic plumbing of the psyche that Edinger has yet put forward. As you will note, is looking at his works, there is an integrating theory that integrates all of these works. They're not all over the place. You may think that there's a huge differentiation. Well, the differentiation is clear in the text, widely ranging from different cultures. But these things, Dr. Edinger has a vision, and he's got a theory about the way transformation occurs, and that vision is expressed actually quite clearly in this ego and archetype, and I don't think he differentiates widely from it. I hope that we'll have some time to anticipate the March 4th day on the apocalypse, and some of these images that I've passed out for you to peruse up here. And those of you that came in late, at the break, you'll want to get copies of these handouts, and I want you to be meditating on those at the breaks and during your lunch hour. So this morning, I want to focus on what I would like to call the metabolism of the psyche, and I want to relate it to. I want to talk about it in such a way that those of you who are psychotherapists or spiritual directors, will have some way to connect this with clearly clinical issues, and do it in such a way that we can really see the clarity with which he understood things that didn't get more widely understood in psychoanalysis until quite a bit later. That is the dynamics of grandiosity, what we call today narcissistic pathology. This book is a brilliant analysis of the nature and dynamics and healing of narcissistic pathology. People don't normally think of it that way, but that clearly is the case. Hopefully we'll have enough time before we take our lunch break for us to interact and me to work with you on particular questions you may have about this metabolism. After lunch, I would like to come back and begin by talking about some clinical implications. That is, if we really understand this and we really think he's right about these fundamental issues, what implications does that have for the practice of psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, spiritual direction? There are huge implications, and we'll come back after lunch and I'll talk about that. And then we can move toward more the question of being able to recognize where one is in this process personally, and to address more of the things about our own individuation process. You know, we therapists like to let the analysans handle the individuation and not really face our own individuation task. A lot of the time it's that healer-patient split that's so handy for a therapist. So, and then I'll just focus in summary on what I think are the particular strengths of his point of view, and what I think are some of its limitations that we need to be continually working on and trying to move beyond, to build on his foundation here. So if that's okay with you, that's what we'll do. Let me begin by reading this obituary. This is an obituary written by the editor of this posthumous book, Archetype of the Apocalypse, George Elder, who was a friend of Dr. Edinger's and worked on putting together this posthumous book for Open Court Press. Edward Edinger, senior analyst at the C.G. Jung Institute of Los Angeles and widely considered the dean of Jungian analysts in the United States, died on July 17, 1998, at his home. A spokesman for the family reported the cause to be complications from bladder cancer. He was 75 years old. A former supervising psychiatrist of the Rockland State Hospital in Orangeburg, New York, he eventually became a founding member of the C.G. Jung Foundation of New York and the C.G. Jung Institute of New York. He served as president of the Institute from 1968 to 1979. Moving to Los Angeles in 1979, he continued to write, teach, and practice there for 19 years. He was a member of the American Psychiatric Association and the International Association for Analytical Psychology, and practiced analytically altogether for 45 years. While willing to publish clinical pieces, such as, quote, some manifestations of the transference phenomenon, unquote, he believed analysts and patients were best served by understanding what the psyche has already said about itself in the cultural products of religion, philosophy, alchemy, and literature. Thus he is the author of The Eternal Drama, The Inner Meaning of Greek Mythology, as well as The Bible and the Psyche, Individual Symbolism in the Old Testament, The Christian Archetype, a Jungian commentary on the life of Christ, Anatomy of the Psyche, Alchemical Symbolism in Psychotherapy, and Melville's Moby Dick. The single work that brings these topics together is perhaps his best known, Ego and Archetype, Individuation and the Religious Function of the Psyche, published in 1972 and now translated into several foreign languages. Edward Edinger saw his role as mediator of Jung's point of view to the serious reader and patient who had noticed and suffered from the fact that the world has changed since the advent of empirical science 500 years ago. That change meant the demise of traditional religion as projections were withdrawn, the rise of demonic substitutes, as well as the rise of the healing possibility of a new world view. That's what that Apocalypse book is addressing, the healing possibilities. C.G. Jung expressed this cultural sequence in his long essay, Answer to Job, and Edinger followed up with Transformation of the God Image and elucidation of Jung's Answer to Job. Encounter with the Self, a Jungian commentary on William Blake's illustrations of the Book of Job, and a related study of Jung's letters, The New God Image. While exploring this theme of radical cultural change and the creation of consciousness, the author wrote his brilliant essay, quote, The New Myth, unquote, which outlines succinctly what a new worldview based on awareness of psychological reality as opposed to metaphysical or merely physical reality would entail. Edinger remained a loyal, loving follower of C.G. Jung, convinced that the Swiss psychologist was not only great, but an epical man. In his later works, Dr. Edinger wrote more systematically by commenting on Jung's collected works, volumes 5, 9, 2, and 14. His final contribution was a series of lectures soon to be published that analyzed the book of Revelation. That's this Archetype of the Apocalypse book that I showed you a moment ago, which the author explains from a more modern point of view really does anticipate a millennium. Born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa in 1922, Edinger moved with his family in the face of the Depression 9 years later into Indiana. He would eventually study chemistry at Indiana University, earn a medical degree from Yale University in 1946, and serve for 2 years as a medical officer in the United States Army. It was then that the conflict between religion and science gripped Dr. Edinger personally. The work of C.G. Jung showed him the way, and he entered into analysis in 1951 with M. Esther Harding, who had been close to Jung. Eventually, they would collaborate as colleagues to help solidify C.G. Jung's psychology in the United States. A conservative, introverted man with a passionate point of view, Dr. Edinger had a manner reminiscent of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was also a passionate introvert. Neither were very sociable, preferring instead the individual fruits of the study. Neither accepted traditional religious categories, nor could they give them up. Emerson wrote of self-reliance, while Edinger clarified that this self was not the ego, as often misunderstood, but the archetype of the self, a union of otherwise conflicting opposites at the core of the human psyche. He is survived by his wife, Diane D. Kordick, a Jungian analyst, brother, Robert Edinger, 2 children by a former marriage, Clara Jędrowski and Bruce Edinger, and by 2 grandchildren. And we're indebted to George Elder for his work on editing for Dr. Edinger. Let's begin by, you've all got this diagram, these 2 diagrams on the psychic life cycle. And I would just like to have us go through this in this time, and I'll comment on it and give you a little more elaboration. First thing I want to say is this is an ideal model for human experience. For every person that makes it through this round in any kind of consolidated way, there are many, many people who do not make it. And the important thing for us to realize when we're looking at this round is to understand that Dr. Edinger believes that this is the paradigm or the model that we ought to hope for and that we ought to try to embody. A big word for Dr. Edinger, of course, is incarnation. And today we will hopefully think together about incarnation as a psychological challenge for us and not simply a religious dogma. We'll try to follow in his footsteps and Jung's footsteps there. The important thing to realize is that what is being shown to us here is like Paul the Apostle said, the race that is set before us. And what I'd like us to do is to work through this. I have added, in his commentary on this, he talks about he wants to say to us that there are built into this kind of process sort of three phases that move in what I have characterized as a kind of a bipolar oscillation. That's my language, not his. And what is that? We'll get into this in a minute. He talks about the way we begin as children in an unconscious merger with the archetypal self. You see this in this diagram here. And he talks about how life often he tends to suggest to us that it always brings a state of depletion, alienation, and depression, so forth. This is what he's wanting to say. Starting with inflation, then collapsing into what we call today a sense of depletion, depression, alienation, archetypally and mythically dismemberment. And then if the process works like he hopes it does, there will be an oscillation between these two that will be a gradually reducing level of trauma, so that in terms of one's experience in life, it would be something like this. You're really grandiose, but you do not know it in childhood. What we know today clinically is that most of us remain infantile and grandiose into adulthood and old age. But the idea is that some life experience is going to puncture that inflation, that grandiosity. Of course, child psychology, particularly informed by self-psychology today, talks a lot about the various permutations and dynamics of that experience. But if it unfolded as the way that Edinger would hope to see it, there would be an alienation. The parental figures and other mentors would confront the grandiosity, intentionally or unintentionally, that there would be this period of deflation, and then hopefully an attitude of humility might come out of that experience. I say hopefully because we're going to get into what really happens in a minute. But hopefully there would be an understanding that I have been inflated, I've been grandiose, I've been out of line, I need to wake up and change, metanoia, to change. It's like a conversion experience. and achieve a sacrificial attitude in which I understand that I have to contribute something to this process of development. And then by moving in this sacrificial attitude with humility, hopefully, Edinger says, receive acceptance from your parents, your mentors. We would say today in psychoanalysis, your self-objects, your significant others. And that acceptance of your saying you're sorry, authentically being aware of the mistake and the overreaching, be reconnected with the energies of the archetypal self. And then, as he says, this is so carefully put, partially return to inflated state. Meaning that you don't get it right the first time you go through this. You don't move from inflation to balance after your humiliating experience. You are inflated, you get humiliated, you come back, you reconnect, and then you get inflated again. Edinger says, hopefully, it's a less intense degree. Now again, I want you to understand that this is really a normative vision. This usually doesn't happen, unfortunately. But then this term passive inflation, what do you think Edinger means by it? Passive inflation? Does any of you ever give us a midrash on that? A commentary on passive inflation. What would he mean by that? Obviously, he does look at it. It's very high in the level of development. Obviously, it doesn't mean something terrible. What do you suppose that means? Anybody got a shot at that? What would he mean by that? Yeah, I think, see, he's contrasting it, the way to read it, he is contrasting that from this. And we're going to come back and talk about what active inflation is. But now, so let me just give you an example. Can anyone give me an example of active inflation that he would use to illustrate this place? What would active inflation be if you were manifesting it, or if somebody in your family or your friends were manifesting an active inflation?
Being angry and upset at my loved ones because things don't go my way.
That's kind of a mild, understandable husbandly and fatherly form, but that is an example. That's right. Yes. I want what I want when I want it. I want it perfectly yesterday without effort. Right. The codependent phenomenon. He's saying, I am responsible for somebody else's pain and I can fix it. Or I should have fixed it. And since I didn't fix it, I deserve to die. I'm an unworthy nothing. I'm sitting on the bottom of the ocean on the cigarette butt, dangling my legs. And that's we call what do we call that too? That form of inflation they usually call what? It's a negative inflation, right? Okay, but it's sort of a blatant manifestation of what I call that. It's a blatant manifestation of kind of a God claim or goddess claim for me. You know, I am demanding that you bow and kiss my ring in some way. And the interesting thing about this, and we'll get into this more as we go, the individual doesn't really realize they're inflated. See, that's what we don't have sufficient understanding of. That is, we're not empathic enough with ourselves or other people about these matters, because we usually think that when somebody is coming on in an arrogant way, that they know it, that they know they're being arrogant. And they're just choosing to rub our face in it, in their arrogance. But that's really not the case. So it's really sort of, I'd like to say, an active inflation is one that's really in your face, as the DSM-4 says, the narcissistic personality disorder. There's a tremendous sense of entitlement in it. Entitlement and demand. Now, this is passive inflation. Dr. Edinger is contrasting, I think, with that. It's not what he's talking about here. So, phenomenologically, what sort of experience do you think he would be describing here? Any ideas about the subjective experience that you might have, or a patient of yours might have, if they were in a passive inflation? Any thought? I think that's in the territory. She says self-satisfaction. I think that's in the territory because it would be the capacity to have some sense of primal satisfaction, some sort of primal sense of joy in your being, some ability to really take pleasure in who you are. Really kind of shine a little bit and really be able to see that there is a certain radiance about you, a certain glow that is in you that is not phony, but is reflecting your participation, your more appropriate participation in this larger psychic reality. So when he said, it's an interesting choice of words. I don't think it communicates what he is trying to get at very clearly, but I think what he's saying, this is sort of a state of reflectiveness, awareness. It's a sense of tremendous awareness, a sense of more than self-acceptance. You got your acceptance in here, but it's really related to what we talk about as joy, not happiness. It's not the same as happiness, but a kind of a vibrance. And it does not call upon you to write 7 of the greatest novels that were ever written in the next 2 months. It doesn't put that kind of demand on you. And so he's got this coming back into an intersection with an original wholeness. So this is the what he imagines as the alchemical process. This is the paradigm of individuation. In my work, I work a lot on the mythology and dynamics of what's been called initiation. I'm working on a monograph now about my work on the initiation archetype, ritual, sacred space, and healing. This is his treatment of sort of initiatory process. What is required in initiatory process? Yes.
So then, this is partly out kind of the process with the passive depletion and the philosopher's stone.
Yeah, you're getting the lapis then. The philosopher's stone is beginning to be something more than an idea. It's not a concept. It's, yes, in a dream you may have it, you're getting to this place. When you begin to touch this in your own individuation work or in your analytical work, there will often be dreams of jewels. Sometimes a jewel that is discovered in the mouth, or somewhere else a treasure that's discovered. And I think so it is. But what Edinger will talk about, and we need to reflect on together today, he'll say, now this is empirical scientific psychology. See, he will say he's not doing the metaphysical thing here. But he's talking about, and here's where it's true, what he's saying is true. It's like he's talking about an experiential reality that will manifest in dreams and other synchronistic phenomena, but it is that attainment of the stone, in the sense that it is accessible, it is with you, it is present, it's not still buried somewhere away from you. So what I'd like to, any other, let me just open it up now for the questions about his treatment of this round, and then I'm going to start doing commentary on it in terms of what actually happens with people. Yes, Terry.
At the chasm in it occurs that the person who experiences real or imagined abandonment, because he now has to become all-sufficient to himself.
Right.
And I was thinking that would be just the antithesis of the active part.
Interesting.
On the grave. And
yes.
I am nobody, so I've got to do this and become all things to thee.
Yeah. Harry's asking about, he's pointing out to the potential that in this late aspect in one's process that one actually may actually be abandoned by the world. In fact, some of the people that have attained this the most have literally undergone crucifixion or murder or radical rejection at the very point when they have attained the most spiritually, or in terms of their maturation spiritually or psychologically. And the other important thing, what Harry is raising here, is the way in which there is a certain sense of being complete, no matter what the world brings. There is potential for you and for me getting to the place where we no longer scatter our sense of integration to the winds through projections of any kind, where we do not dump our projection of our true self on persons, lovers, children, parents, institutions, ideologies, any cultural form, but where we have, in this beautiful section in this book, where Edinger's talking about multiplicity and unity, there is possible for us to regain, to draw those projections back in, experience that philosopher's stone, and to be able to have a certain kind of what the New Testament speaks of as the peace that passes understanding, or what the Hebrew Scriptures talk about as shalom, in spite of being actually rejected or terribly ill or having other things in the outer world going bad for you. So that is possible. It is a saintly, that's the real meaning of what, we speak of as saintliness. So I think that's really right, Harry. Any other thoughts or reflections at this point? Yeah. So good. That's a good question. He's asking, when does mandala symbolism come up? And that's an excellent question and a complex one, because it can come up at different points in the process, reflecting different mechanisms, different, the psyche, to the extent that the archetypal self really is a source of ordering. And today I want to make clear that it's not as much a sense of ordering as most Jungians have thought. But there is a sense of ordering in the archetypal self, in that it tends to work like a gyro, which tries to, if you have one opposite dominant in your ego, the archetypal self will seek to constellate the balancing opposite. And if you're in a tremendous state of fragmentation after a tremendous disappointment, and your psyche is in danger of a Chernobyl, a radical meltdown, a kind of a terminal meltdown, the archetypal self will often give you an injection of images of wholeness at that crisis point. It's quite clear that at times of great crisis, we are actually, not only do we have those images in our dreams, we will seek them out in culture. Edinger would say the self is kind of coming to our rescue then, to try to balance this fragmentation, to try to offer another word, a word beyond the fragmentation. So it's quite clear what you were suggesting, that maybe it comes up when you're really fragmenting and falling to pieces, being dismembered, and that's certainly true. Not all the time, but it does happen in people's dreams. But it also can come as a kind of a blessing from an affirmation from the unconscious to what you're doing in your individuation process. I will often see in people's dreams when they have faced some very difficult ordeal and when they have really made the sacrifice and they've really done the work that they've needed to do, which increasingly I'm aware how difficult that is for people to do. That the psyche will give the ego consciousness a blessing, say, yes, you're doing well, you're moving toward this. So it can come, and a mandala does not do differential diagnosis for you. A mandala image in a dream or in a active imagination or in painting. It does not tell you where you are in individuation. That is something that you have to put together with a lot of evidence. What evidence do I have that I'm actually moving toward integration? And what evidence do I have that I'm on the verge of a terminal regression? And so that's an excellent question. Any other? Yes. And we'll come back over here.
Yeah, let's scroll over. To me, is that kind of like an outside event kind of thing, and an area us?
Well, the way he presents that in the page in the book that's after this diagram, this B is when someone confronts your grandiosity. I want to use the word grandiosity today because inflation has gotten domesticated. The word inflation is we can be too accepting of our inflation. It's very much more, if you understand that when you're inflated, you're grandiose. And you don't know it, usually. Usually you don't know it. And so the B encounter, you can see there's kind of a break here. You have gotten into this is a technical use of this too. He's not talking about you save somebody from drowning. Although saving someone from drowning may put you in an inflated state, which is dangerous to you. What he's talking about is the heroic ego, which is puffed up from its own competence and its own invulnerability. When you're young and healthy, it's easy to kind of get into the idea that you're not going to suffer and die, that you're not going to get sick, suffer and die, or get hit by a Mack truck. That's why bungee jumping is so popular in your 20s, or jumping off these huge cliffs into shallow water. Hey, that's the hero. I'm good at what I do. But this is when that gets confronted, boom, punctured. Now, again, I want to just stay with what Edinger's talking about here, and then I want to complexify it some in terms of what actually happens. Say that confrontation occurs. He is assuming there's a deflation there. Deflation, depletion, depression from the confrontation. Sometimes does happen. If you see what's going on, if you understand what's going on, someone calls you on your grandiosity, and you are in a particularly wise moment, right? You're in this wise moment where you're going to hear that, where you're going to see the truth in what they said, a particularly teachable moment, right? But the truth is, with us folks, is that those teachable moments when we're open to having our grandiosity confronted and not seeing it as a vicious, sadistic attack on our being are few and far between. So what in fact often happens here is we're inflated. We get into our heroic, strut of some kind. Men have their versions, females have their versions. And then somebody doesn't buy the marketing, What often happens at that point? Instead of oh, golly, I have messed up. I really was arrogant, and now I know I need to be humble. What often happens? Yeah, that's a mild version. See, now he's talking about what we call the grandiose retreat. That is actually the technical term. That is, if you are fairly well put together at that moment, and you're not really on the edge of fragmenting right at that moment when that comes, you will be able to maintain a sense of outward coolness when that comes. And you may say, see ya. But what we've noticed in more recent years in study of narcissism, narcissistic dynamics, is that when that comes, we will then go away and we will engage in what is this grandiose retreat. And it will be, I'm going to go away from the source of this insult. This isn't, you're insulting me. See, it's not my fault. You simply are not appreciating how wonderful I am. And if one is not as cool as this, what will often come immediately? Rage. Now, narcissistic rage, see, you cannot understand this process that he's talking about here if you don't really get into understanding narcissistic vulnerability in relationship to grandiosity, narcissistic rage and the different forms it takes. And you got to ask yourself, when do I get enraged? What happens to me that I get enraged? How does my rage manifest? Does it manifest coldly and coolly? Or does it manifest hot? So if your desire to defend your active inflation is close to the surface, you may become violent at that point. We need to understand that a lot, I would argue, the vast, huge percentage of domestic violence occurs right here. And it is not the ideal round. It is not a manifestation of this paradigm of the process. What happens is that this encounter occurs and a reaction other than the depletion occurs. There is a sense of wounding, however. This is what we've called today narcissistic wounding. And depending on how solid your sense of self-esteem is, we can tell how much of a hit it takes to make you feel dismembered. See? So if your self-esteem, let me just finish this and then we'll go into it with you. If your self-esteem is really solid, you can endure more insult torpedoes hitting your ship of self without blowing up. But if your self-esteem is weak, or if you're feeling vulnerable and on the verge of fragmentation because of something that has happened in your life, a major loss of some form, an illness, some reversal in your career or relationships, then you may not be able to take much of a blow at all before you really explode into rage and violence. It's a response to a wounding that is experienced as a threat to the safety of the self. It's really a life and death matter to the subjectivity. And the person is trying to avoid this dismemberment, because the experience of dismemberment, if you don't have this sense of the transformative aspect of dismemberment, you will experience that as terminal fragmentation of the psyche and fear psychosis. There'll be tremendous fear of becoming psychotic right here. So getting to the point where you can actually move into a consciousness of your wounding and a consciousness of what's happening to you here. This is a huge attainment. This is that Jungian ethics of awareness. It's one thing to get narcissistically wounded by a rebuff to your grandiosity and feel that they're trying to alienate me. They are trying to destroy me. It's not experienced as they are trying to make me less arrogant and thereby save my life. That's not the way it's experienced. It's they are trying to destroy me. And so moving from that to an awareness of needed changes is a huge achievement. Now let me just open it up for any reflection or comment on that. I'm just trying to complexify for you here what we now know. The amazing thing is how much Edinger anticipated all the recent research on the psychology, psychodynamics of narcissism in psychoanalytic schools that are not Jungian. Everything that he says in these sections has been corroborated. It's just that the achievement of what he's talking about here, we need to complexify it a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just a comment. It's a visual depiction of what you were talking about. Just a week ago, I saw a meeting in Magnolia, and there's a scene where Tom Cruise is this inflated character, and he's confronted by the reporter, and it's a wonderful scene in terms of, was he going to attack her? So, just a comment.
Yes, have you all seen Magnolia? Raise your hand if you've seen Magnolia. If you haven't seen it, see that, and if you have seen it, see it again. That's one of the most, I think, profound, serious reflections on psychological and spiritual reality that we've seen lately. And that scene, Tom Cruise is really into his phallic narcissism, you know, his swagger. Speaking of swagger, I mean, man, he tries to perfect it in that movie. And then he's been trying to not deal with this incredible betrayal and abuse by his father. He just tries to stay away from it in what we call in analysis a manic defense. That is, if you don't want to deal with all of the cesspool down here and all the stuff that's in it, you just go up into your active inflation. This is a manic state here. And we can call that a manic defense. And, you know, the important thing, and I'm touched by how much empathy Edinger has and expresses in this book for people who are inflated. I didn't get that when I read it before. He was emphasizing empathy for grandiosity, grandiose exhibitionistic dynamics, long before all this recent literature on empathy for such things came out. Now, there are many more reactions. I was just wanting to emphasize that there are others we can talk about, but one does not automatically move into repentance after having one's grandiosity confronted. Tragically, we most often move into just the opposite. We will try to increase our defenses against being aware of that, or we will go into a rage, or we will take a grandiose retreat, or we will flip into a terminal dismemberment that doesn't move. You see, there's not necessarily a connection, really. You see, you can go, and this is why I wanted to put up here what I wanted to put up here. If you read this and you're trying to romanticize the paradigm a little bit too much, you will assume, well, we start out, we've got inflation, then we get alienation, and then we get inflation, alienation, alienation, you know, and then balance. And it just kind of goes that way. But the truth is just in terms of epidemiology, just in terms of what we can see around us and in us. I mean, think about yourself. The truth is, we will often move to a fixation point on that. You know, most people are not psychothymic or bipolar. That is to say, most people don't oscillate that much. In fact, you will notice that a lot of people get depleted and depressed and they stay there. And they will find some addiction, some addictive means to medicate the pain of this. See? I mean, they will, and this can be from early childhood, or this can be from some enormous trauma that occurs in young adulthood, or some other place in the life cycle. I have been astounded to notice in people that somebody can function very well. And, you know, this goes against some of the classic developmental theories, that somebody can really have a pretty doggone well-functioning ego, and they can have good parenting and so forth, so on. And then some kind of trauma, some kind of what Tillich would talk about as an experience of non-being, a major encounter with non-being, come in and blast you, and you get locked right in that. And in order not to go completely into terminal fragmentation, commit suicide. Something you don't want. In order not to commit suicide, then an addiction will be chosen as a means of self-medicating the pain, to contain the pain, so that one doesn't go there, because the dismemberment experience is not seen. They don't think about it like Jungians. You know, if you can maintain your Jungian sensibility in the middle of trauma, it's a help. I'm saying that's not a throwaway. That is important. If you could think about what are the initiatory potentials here in this experience, and that's hard to keep that frame when you're really in the middle of the cook pot. Yes.
Is it helpful to think of the alienation to manage the dismemberment process, whereas on the DSM-4, Axis 1, and some folks schizophrenia first down, and is that?
He's raising the issue about these very severe regressions that we see in the DSM. We talk about in the DSM-4 or in Theodore Milan's work, psychotic episodes of various kinds. I think it's quite clear that you're right that often psychotic episodes are the direct result of having what little hold on grandiosity. See, we have to understand this grandiosity is not a bad thing. It is, you must have some connection, a life-giving connection with that. That's God energy. And you've got to have some life-giving connection with that, or you won't feel like staying alive. So if you have really had an abusive childhood, often you will not have very much of a sense of connection with that already, see. And then some real insult happens in your life, and it can easily push you into psychotic fragmentation. That's a very complex area right there too, and one I've lectured about in other settings and other courses here. But I think you're absolutely right, and it is and it would happen. Here's the thing to face. You know, everybody in this room can get really psychotic. No, none of us are exempt. And if you take enough hits, and you don't have any spiritual practice or any serious ritual practice which helps remind you in the midst of suffering, which helps to remind you that there really is around, and there really is in that archetypal self, there is a resource of nurturance and acceptance and holding, that there's a certain holding that is in that archetypal part of you. If you know that, see, I'm of the opinion it really matters what kind of psychological and spiritual dynamic theories you adhere to. Because there are a lot of these theories, if you adhere to them and you really get in trouble, they give you a terminal prognosis. And that's not too much help when you're about to sink. You know, yeah. Excuse me? Well, I'm just saying that any kind of psychological theory which doesn't have any sense that there are more integrative resources and transpersonal resources in your unconscious than just your ego. In other words, there are many theories which are sort of chaos, order, chaos models. and not in the romantic sense of contemporary fantasies about chaos, but the idea that the only generative order in your personality comes out of your effort, your will. And there are many theories that kind of, they feel like there's only one source of order in the psyche. And of course, Mr. Edinger constantly emphasized there are two sources of order. The archetypal self is a source of transpersonal order from the objective psyche, and the hope is that we will develop our little s self or human ego sources of ordering as much as we can under the conditions of human existence. Now, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about that first section.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I worked in penal system for a number of years, and I'm thinking about another loop. They go, the sociopathic did redefines another heroic act. That which does not kill me makes me stronger.
Yes.
Think whatever they're going to get.
Yes.
And rise above it. So they go back into that first.
Yeah, absolutely. Instead of going on, they retreat into the grandiosity. And they circle their wagons even tighter. If you see the movie Hurricane, it shows Hurricane doing that, this boxer, it shows him doing that in prison. And it's only the love of people outside of prison that begin to get in past that armor plate. But he names it a sociopathic. Technically, that's right, sociopathic. What we got to understand, though, is that is a sort of a what Milan calls an active, independent strategy. It's a Saddam Hussein strategy. It's like, okay, you wounded me. I was vulnerable that time. I will be less vulnerable next time. And I was a victim that time. You're going to be the victim next time. Yeah. Cape Fear. Whoa. Cape Fear. De Niro and Cape Fear. Another example of this. So this is very important. See what you're saying here, because you see this whole thing here, this is a decision tree right here. This doesn't just go like this. It's a decision tree. You can come back into this. You can go into a grandiose retreat and go away. You know what happens in a lot of communities is, this happens in church communities, religious organizations, and so forth. It happens in psychoanalytic organizations all the time. You know, I present my grandiosity to me, you wound me, I will go start another institute. I will go start another church. I will go start another order. I will go start another whatever business. But it's a distancing, and very often what happens when that distancing thing is chosen, it's a the avoidance of the suffering necessary to confront the grandiosity and the sacrifice involved in that leads to a diminution of life. That is, they do go away, they do start over, but often it's a very, very much reduced life. See? Yes.
The other ideal piece, in addition to the hope that ideally we will take means for the mankind at meaningful reactions to our grandiosity, and though that the other ideal piece is that every attack is loving and accurate, and you should always medicine.
I'm sorry.
Any suggestions for how?
This is a very interesting. Let me just rephrase the question, see if I get it right. He's saying, you know, in an ideal model, these folks that are attacking your grandiosity mean well. They're invested in your transformation and your individuation process. But he's saying, what about those cases where could it be that perhaps some of those people do not are not in support of your individuation, not intending anything well? What about that? This is a huge thing. Of course, on the one hand, Edinger would have us use unfair attacks for our own development. Edinger that's what he would have as a goal for us. That we would learn from that, and that we would be able to take that and cook that in the alchemical fires, and that we would be able to become more wise out of that. And of course, there's truth in that. The truth is, the more integrated and more powerful you get, the more you're going to be attacked. And the fantasy is, when I really get myself together, I will be appreciated. And I will be blessed when I really get myself together. Well, that's just wrong. I'm sorry to say, it's wrong. The truth is the opposite. The more you shine, the more the vampires will come out. And the more those that have a lot of toxic envy will come out. And read Cinderella and Her Sisters by Anne Ulanov just to get a feeling for how toxic envy is. And so the interesting thing is, it's precisely in here that you're going to incur a tremendous amount of envy, and you're going to be least prepared to deal with it. And that probably is another way to think about what you would be like over here. Over here, you're going to have envy attacks, but it's not going to be as deadly for you in terms of your own psychic health. They may be deadly for your physical health. They may kill you, but it's not going to you're not going to be as vulnerable to it later in the individuation process. So the whole envy area of dynamics is, and when your grandiosity is raw, there is nobody that hates you more than somebody else whose grandiosity is raw. And so it's very interesting. You will see, it's very interesting to watch narcissistic personality disorders try to relate, because they've got the same problem, they need the same things, and they're wonderful receptacles for shadow projection for each other, and envy projections and hate. So that's a really important point. Now Edinger does this wonderful work with a number of primal mythic and symbolic traditions. One of the ones that's key to understanding this next phase is the whole psychodynamics of sacrifice. I have included one of the pages in which he lists these different kinds of sacrifice. And if you're going to get some sense of the complexity of his thought about this process, you've got to spend some time looking at this whole issue of the various forms of sacrifice and the way sacrifice is, in his view, an essential achievement. You have to achieve the capacity to come to a conscious ability to sacrifice. And that's what this thing here, the sacrificial attitude, is about. This is extremely complex because at this point the psyche has come off of the high horse, hopefully, and has recognized that it is not the same as the great self, the archetypal self. This is a process of disidentification. And this whole issue of sacrificial dynamics, I just want to call your attention to, because he does a lot of meditation on that. All that I've given you, that plate in the handouts around blood. The whole symbolism of blood is related to this issue of sacrifice. This is also related to your own ritual process in your psychological development. The question is, when you begin to break your primal unconscious unity with the archetypal self, and you begin to really understand that there's a capital O other in here, first of all, how do you acknowledge that in a helpful way? That's really the question here. Say, oh my goodness, I have sort of been assuming I'm one with the archetypal self, or God, as Edinger and Jung kind of tend to equate the two. I want to get into a mode of repentance and change, but the practical thing is how, in order to do that, I've got to achieve a sacrificial attitude. I've got to do something which can symbolize my acknowledgement that I am not the archetypal self, that the ego, my ego and the archetypal self are not one. If you study the literature on sacrifice, it's really about transactions It's one of the most ancient ritual processes in human culture. There's every reason to believe that pre-modern human beings, indigenous peoples, had a tremendous sophistication about the importance of doing sacrifice in order not to be crazy. People who minimize the importance of sacrificial ritual or sacrificial symbolism, very common in theological education these days. In theology, there are very few people who have any sense about the importance of sacrifice. They tend to equate sacrifice with child abuse. The divine sacrifice images of Christ's death, and crucifixion, they tend to say, oh, wow, that's just abusive. They have very little understanding of the dynamics of sacrifice or the dynamics of the appropriate symbolism in the Mass. So Edinger, following Jung, is trying to call our attention to the transformation of symbolism in the Mass and how there are all these different dynamics in the practice of sacrifice, but the most important one is the attainment of the capacity to be in a conscious capacity to sacrifice aspects of your own potential being to the larger self in order to firm up the ego self-axis. This is where you start really creating ritually an ego self-axis. One of the interesting things that I noticed by going through this stuff again is when I first went through Edinger's work, I never noticed the way he had been influenced by Paul Tillich. This time through, it stood out to me that when he was in New York, he must have been spending time with Tillich, because some good deal of his language, you can see Tillich behind it. Tillich understood, and Tillich would argue that all life is about sacrifice. And if you're going to deal with your tendency toward hubris, you're going to have to realize that every decision is a sacrifice. It is a giving up a certain potential. This whole area that Edinger's talking about here is in the area of what Kierkegaard talked about when he talked about the sickness of infinitude. Kierkegaard talked about the way in which we human beings, he didn't know this stuff at that time, but this is what he was talking about. When you're really grandiose, you're not willing to make choices and realize you can't actualize all your potentials. And so you hold on to all of your potentials, unwilling to make any sacrifices consciously, and of course then are in despair because you cannot really actualize any of the potential, because you hold on to not making decisions. Well, I could be a brain surgeon, or I could be another Picasso, and I'm not going to decide which one I'm really going to try to pursue. And so I maintain my potentials, but I am paralyzed by my inability to sacrifice, to make an offering of something. And so Edinger, part of what he's talking about is, if you start closing in on your humanness, you will realize that you have all of these wonderful potentials and imaginings that you're going to have to sacrifice. You're going to have to find some way to consciously put a lot of that on the altar. There's a plate I gave you about Job sacrificing before Yahweh. This is what Edinger was picking up. The key here being that you will not be able to really access the power and potentials in the archetypal self if you're not willing to consciously cut off some of those potentials that you're not going to actualize, offer them up, and also offer the ones that you are planning to actualize. That's the Eucharistic metaphor. When in the Mass, when the people bring forward the elements, that's not an image of giving, doing away with the things of life. That's bringing the potentials that you are, putting them on the altar in an attempt to have those things blessed and sanctified, the Christians say, so that they can be multiplied by the divine action, or what Edinger would call by the action, the creativity of the archetypal self. This is a lot about the psychology of creativity here. If you're an artist or a writer, the more you claim your creativity as your own and cannot put that on the altar of the archetypal self, so to speak, then the more writer's block you will have, or the more overwhelmed you will be by the grandiosity and immobilized and unable to act. Won't be able to decide which painting you're going to do, because you have 5 great paintings in your mind, but you can't decide which one to work on first. You follow that? It's like any decision about any creative process is a sacrifice already first, because you can't work on other things if you're going to work on that. That can be consciously made into a sacrifice, internal psychic sacrifice. And secondly, if you do not claim the creativity as solely your own purpose of the property of the ego, but if you put that creative project on the altar, you will be fueled, according to Edinger, by the life-giving creative energies of the archetypal self. So it is in that sacrificial attitude that, according to Edinger, one achieves a reconnection with those energies, those life-giving energies. It is through the making the offering, the Eucharistic offering of your elements on the altar of the self, that the reconnection is reestablished and the energy flows for a reintegration. So pay particular attention to those sections on sacrifice. We'll come back after lunch and think about, well, practically speaking, in my own individuation process, what am I unwilling to sacrifice? How am I holding on to my grandiosity, unwilling to get into that sacrificial attitude, and thereby immobilizing myself? So let me just open that up for any reflections or comments about this sacrifice, the importance of sacrifice in the reconnection with the energies of the archetypal self. Remember, when you're alienated, what do you get? A phenomenology of depression, depletion, flatness, not creative, no energy, immobilized. So Edinger is talking about a very practical, it's not a wooden metallic kind of technique, but it is a kind of technique. We need to understand that this is why indigenous peoples are so preoccupied with ritual process, because they understand this metabolism better than we do. Let me open that up for comments or reflections or questions at this point. Yes?
It seems to me what these gas, these sort of like that the don't continue the process of all it. It's kind of interesting. Yeah. It almost seems like a circle that because you end up spinning.
Yeah.
Whereas that after the alienation thing there, if you don't get to the next section, it's like you continue to drop
into an abyss. Into an abyss. He's saying for the tape, he's saying that if you don't move into that sacrificial attitude, that you often will fall into an abyss. That is the tremendous existential danger here. And again, in terms of just the epidemiology of what we see around us, I think it's fair to say that more people fall off than or stay fixated than move on into this transformative place. Now, this is what Edinger's project, he had a big capital P project here. He really saw Jung, and then his work continuing Jung, as holding up a process of personal regeneration, cultural regeneration, world regeneration. That stuff they'll do the next time, the March event, they'll be focusing on that apocalyptic aspect of world regeneration. That if you do not respond to the lure of the archetypal self, and if you are haughty before the archetypal self, including identifying with it, you're going to get devastated. And Edinger believed that that's actually what has been going on in modern culture. And Edinger really felt that the rise of modernity as a cultural form and the collapse of the sacred canopy of myth he agreed with Jung that has taken away most of the adequate means of dealing with grandiosity that the human species had, and put us in danger of being overwhelmed by inflation. And you got to look around. You got to look around. There's a lot of evidence that human beings are having a terrible time regulating their grandiosity. Now, let me just comment on it a little bit. Once you begin to look carefully at this, in the last few years, I've been doing an intensive study of the way in which the grandiosity grounded in the archetypal psyche is the main engine, in my view, behind most psychopathology and most social pathology. It is hard to understand how someone, for example, if you don't really know a lot of the dynamics in prison, you don't automatically think that someone in prison is a victim of grandiosity unless you know a lot about the particulars. But the truth is, a lot of persons in prison have never received adequate attuned nurturance. So what? Well, the only way you learn to regulate your grandiosity is by having sustained attuned nurturance over a period of time, where they let you down from your grandiose high chair in a gradual way. And if you have had bad parenting, you may have no defenses at all against your infantile grandiosity. It may be completely dominating you through no fault of your own, really. And so, in other words, it may not occur to me then that I need to study or learn to hold a job or do any of the things that are necessary to be what the Adlerians call a cooperative member of a social world, because I have never had anyone help me learn to regulate my grandiosity. And so I'm totally at its mercy. I am totally victimized by it, to the extent that I will, cruise in Riverdale or whatever the name of that river forest and see if I can't abduct a jogger, like happened the last couple of days. And see if I can abduct them. If I can't abduct them, I'll shoot them and leave them to bleed. We have a very unsophisticated view of what criminal behavior is grounded in. We think those are just bad people. The reality is that when you do not assure adequate nurturance in the early years of life, you condemn these persons to being flooded by unconscious grandiosity in which they cannot control themselves. And so the state then will, in a very unconscious way, create a ritual system called the correction system. And that's a whole other story. But the more I study this, the more I realize that we are doing more and more inadequate work on helping people get into this ego self axis. Other comments or questions? Yes.
Would you talk a little bit more about what seemed a real fuzzy theory? If you're in the alienated state, and the next stage is that little process where you eventually have to say, I have all this potential, I can't do it all, I will
to let be and sacrifice.
Right.
It seems that you're being asked to make those sacrifices at just the wrong moment, that somehow you want to have the self kind of say, you're not really going to be a painter. You think you got that talent, but you really don't. Okay, you might want to go with the blame Churchill thing. And if you're disconnected, it seems that you would be in a very likely position to be sacrificing exactly the power you have and offering exactly the wrong things. You're setting yourself up for some sort of
weird acting out. He's saying, look, this doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, that's exactly what
Right. And that's very important to put on the table, because what Edinger is talking about an archetypal process here. And I like to, Anthony Stevens and I like to say this stuff is evolutionary. We're talking about it's very likely not solely biological, but it is at least part of evolutionary psychology. These mechanisms have evolved in your brain function, your neurophysiological capabilities. The thing that I have looked at in my work over the last 20 years is, for thousands of years our species developed a ritual software to go with the biological hardware. And people were not left with their biological mandates without benefit of ritual vessels and without benefit of knowledgeable technicians of the sacred, ritual elders, mentors, and spiritual elders who knew about this process and who knew the pitfalls and who knew how to help people get through these things. And what you're putting your finger on is exactly the situation of modern humans in search of the soul. Because modern humans have been left without benefit of ritual eldership, which should come in all this, but it's particularly critical here. Ritual containment. This is what I'm working on in that Archetype of Initiation, Ritual, Sacred Space, and Healing material. Because you need somebody who knows what's happening, knows about the process, the pilgrimage of human life, knows what is happening, knows that you're likely to make bad decisions when you're regressed. So you're regressed here. You're in a serious regression. You're in what would be called a grief process. And what we know about the grief process is when you're in a grief process, you don't make great decisions. And not only, you wouldn't make great decisions if you were hitting on all your cylinders at that point, but you're not hitting on all your cylinders when you've had a big loss. So you need somebody, this is, an analyst that understands this type of thing can help. But in pre-modern cultures, the whole society knew that everyone in the society had a role to play in ritual containment, ritual mentoring, ritual eldering. Increasingly now, more and more people in the women's movement and the men's movement have been facing this gulf and been trying to respond to it, but our efforts are puny compared to what is needed. You could even, based on what you're saying, you could see a lot of suicide attempts as failed attempts to symbolize this. Some sacrifice needs to happen. Something needs to die. So it must be me. Yeah.
It's Tracy. I'm just playing with the idea of alienation from self on a collective level. Ritual is something I've been playing with for over years, but ritual containment on a collective level, you go up to fixation, consider
Yeah.
that what we're doing on the internet, but we go to the mall and the whole financial, economic, in the current container.
Right. Yes, it is a sort of the consumer culture is a myth ritual complex. And there are a number of these pseudo-myth ritual complexes that are operating in our culture in a big way. And related to that is this prison industrial complex. It is a pseudo-myth ritual complex. Neither of these have been brought to the level of consciousness that Edinger would call us to. Edinger would say, we need to understand what's happening here. This is all symbolic. And in fact, in that Apocalypse book, he goes into a lot of the social dislocation now, and he's talking about this as moving toward a kind of a collective ritual, sort of a sacrificial collective ritual. He is concerned, quite rightly, I think, that it's going to be an unconscious acting out. And some very unconscious people, really unconscious, what I like to call loosely organized people, they are very, very sensitive to archetypal pressures, more so than the ordinary neurotic. And so some fourth level regressed alcoholic soldier in Russia who happens to know how to get at a satchel-sized nuclear weapon. This is the kind of thing Edinger in this Apocalypse book is drawing people's attention to. These unconscious processes try to live themselves out, and they don't ask for your vote. And the more unconscious people there are around, and see, Edinger's vision of hell, I think, is kind of what we got now. All these unconscious people who don't have a clue about what's going on in this process, and yet their psyche is wired for this process. And so you're either going to do it consciously or you're going to act it out unconsciously. You don't get to choose not doing it. You're going to go through this process either consciously or unconsciously. If you go through it unconsciously, it is terribly destructive. If you try to get enough conscious people and they start working on this stuff consciously, then a true regeneration is possible. And that's what this Archetype of the Apocalypse book, that's the essence of this book. His argument is that the book of Revelation really is talking about the current, he thinks it's talking about what really is happening right now in the world in terms of this metabolism. And he is saying we're really coming right up on a period in which we will see if there are enough people struggling for consciousness to do work on this process consciously and move us to a new consciousness as a species that will create hope for our planet, or is consumerism and fundamentalism, nationalism, these different isms, are they going to be the ones that are the beneficiaries of all this archetypal power? And will they allow some of the most unconscious individuals to get us into a literal acting out of this death and rebirth process? Yeah.
If you talk about self-death important at all,
I'm sure he doesn't talk about it much, but he is aware of that and Jung's contribution to it. You would think of 12-step work as an attempt to respond to this issue of containment. In fact, you would have to argue that in our culture, most religious institutions are not very effective at actually practically helping people deal with regulating their grandiosity. I call it persona religion. In persona religion, I expect you to come to church and put your best side forward. You're supposed to look prosperous and have your best suit, or your best clothes on. And you're surely not supposed to be doing serious work on asking the question, how am I grandiose? Or how are we fundamentalists grandiose? That's not a question we ask, How are we Catholics grandiose? How are we UCC liberals grandiose? How are we Unitarians grandiose? We don't do that. It's how they are grandiose, And so AA and 12-step programs If you really look down at a sophisticated, one of these wise, experienced sponsors in a 12-step program, they're marked, they're a ritual elder, and what a sponsor in a 12-step program does is they try to puncture your grandiosity in as loving a way as they can, but firm. Don't try to bullshit a bullshitter. It's that. Could we go over that again? Is this alcoholic? Is this an alcoholic talking here? Is this that bluster, that inflated bluster stuff? What's real here? Or is the people in the New Warrior Network, the Mankind Project, they are trying to institutionalize forms that are very similar to this, where instead of getting in a group and talking about how wonderful you are and how everything is just hunky-dory in your life, they say, well, okay, so how are you destroying yourself this week? How are you destroying your family? What are you contributing to the destruction of your marriage? How is it that you are completely avoiding dealing with your shadow and therefore making everybody around you suffer? So there are 12-step programs and other folks that are trying to provide some serious assistance in working with this. We have to, Edinger would say, as I would say, that it's not adequate. We've got to do better. Oh yes, I'm sure he would say it's not adequate. Because what he was doing before his death is tracking what he sees as kind of a gathering storm. And the gathering storm is all of this human inflation. And, he doesn't give you list of it. That's not his style. He doesn't list all the social data. But he alludes to it, and he makes it clear what he's talking about. He's talking about all the indications that we've got an epidemic of unregulated inflation on the planet, and the human species has to choose. Are we going to get conscious about this? Are we going to understand our psychic situation? What is our psychic situation? It's dangerous. That's really Edinger's, we got to be clear about that at this point. Edinger is not a Pollyanna type of person. He thinks that our situation is dangerous. Always, all the time. He thinks that it is so critical for us to get awake and get conscious about where we are in this process and take decisive steps to move our process forward, doing what is necessary to make the next step forward, to work on that unconscious identification with the self. When we come back after lunch, I want you to tell me, how do you know, what are the signs of it when you're unconsciously identified with the self? You've got a lot of experience at this, and so do I. And we can compare notes after lunch. But are someone that you love and haven't been able to help, what are the signs? Yeah, Bob.
And ritual creates culture without related, or they just doing more about the teaching it.
Well, it's not a one-to-one. He's asking about what I mentioned as the prison industrial complex as being a sort of an unconscious ritual process in our culture. It's huge. The cost, the financial cost of what we're doing, the dysfunctional things we're doing in so-called corrections is astounding. Most of us are in such denial about it, we're not informed about it. But we're putting enormous amounts of money into building prisons and practically no money into helping people have the ritual containment they need to not go to prison. Most of the people in prison have addictions problems. Almost all of them have been sexually abused. These are people who've never been helped in the early developmental process, helping to learn to regulate their instinctuality, and it is not their fault. And society has an obligation. That's what civilization means. You're not a civilization if you do not build in systems to help people learn wisdom. If it's not built in and not voluntary, you've got to have systems built in. So, in other words, we do not provide these prisoners 12-step experiences. We do not provide treatment programs for them. So it is an acting out. Many of them are loosely organized, correct? Of course, that's not simply prisoners. Many prisoners are loosely organized. Many people on the outside are loosely organized. But how do you get loosely organized as a personality? Well, you don't have adequate nurture. That's the way you get it. And Edinger points out, he understands there are children who are not adequately confronted. Their grandiosity is not adequately confronted in childhood, and so they grow up to be flamboyant narcissistic personality disorders. And there are children who, when they bring their little God nature, a Buddha nature, to the parents, they get whacked. And the parent never forgives them for wanting to be seen. And so that's when they get alienated and they become chronically depressed for the rest of their lives. So this developmental thing is very key. Before I want to add one factor that is implicit in Edinger, but has never really, he doesn't spend a lot of time articulating this. It's implicit, though, in everything that Edinger believes. And it's extremely clear in the material that they'll be focusing on in that March workshop, the apocalypse materials. And that is that the objective psyche is an agent. It's assertive. It's not passive. It is trying to incarnate in you. And it has huge energy and power. So one of the things I wanted to add is to have you think about before this afternoon is to get clear. We're not talking about a mousy little archetypal energy here. We are talking about a huge force coming from within the human being that is seeking to incarnate in every person. One of the things that we have to be clear about, and Edinger is showing us, what is it that happens when this huge thing tries to get into your body? Late this afternoon, I'm going to express a little reservations about the tone that Edinger leaves us with on this. Because I'll go into this more, but in a way, I don't think Edinger is empathic enough for the humans that this great thing is trying to incarnate in. He knows it, and it's all there in his work. But what I want us to focus on this afternoon is what happens when the great self is trying to come into you. This is not voluntary. You're not choosing for this thing to try to get into you. It's pressuring you. It's pressuring you as I speak. If you're not aware that it's pressuring you, you are in a state of ego self-alienation. You're not aware of it. If you are aware of it, it is scary. And then you can get an existential grasp of how scary it is for the ego self-axis to begin to form. See, as long as I can think that I'm the creator of my problems, that's there. Do you see the psychological defense mechanism in that? If I think, well, I'm creating these problems, I screwed up. I just like whiskey too much, or I'm just weak-willed, I like women, it's my personal failure. But if you ever get to an awareness that there's something in you that is not you, that is not personal, that is overloading your circuits and is behind all of your acting out, and you don't know it, that there is something in you that, while Edinger is right, it doesn't have to be seen as an enemy. Often it is an enemy. And that's what all that stuff about Job is. And in other words, what I want you to get a feeling for that I do not think Edinger adequately presents is how much you're a victim of the archetypal self. Unwitting, unconscious victim of this. And the only way not to be a victim of the archetypal self is what? If you buy Edinger. Exactly. It's your only defense, and then what is possible? Oh, but now what is really, let's talk about realistically what is possible. Can you stop being a victim? But can you stop being a victim in any sense? Look, you either are going to be a conscious sacrifice or you're going to be an unconscious sacrifice. And if I get through the day without impressing this upon you, I will have failed. Because this is probably the most important aspect of Edinger's work that he is more clear about. He's more clear about this in Jung. Not that it's not in Jung, but there's no one that is more clear about this. I've never seen anyone more clear about this than Edinger. And he's so wonderfully, he's a beautiful expresser of all this, and he tells the story so beautifully. The only thing I'm concerned about is there a little Jungian romantic touch on this. Individuation. Well, and I got to be fair to Edinger. Just look at these books. It's all suffering. Suffering, suffering, suffering. You either suffer unconsciously, in which nothing good comes out of it, or you suffer consciously and transformation comes out of it. Certain forms of healing come out of it. Not everything gets healed. World regeneration comes out of it, and for Jung and Edinger, what might even come out of it? More than that. Personal regeneration, cultural regeneration, world regeneration, and maybe what? Maybe the transformation of God. Maybe Jung thought it, and Edinger, we got to come back to that this afternoon. I'm hoping to give a second workshop day in which I'll focus almost totally on Edinger's spiritual ideas, because it deserves attention by itself. And I can't really, I'm doing the clinical psychological stuff today. But he and Jung think that there's some kind of mystery here. And there's some sort of alchemical process in the divine that and this is somebody, you mentioned Kabbalah. There's a tradition in the Kabbalah and in Jewish mysticism that there's a mystery that God really cannot do God's redemptive work without the active partnering of a certain number of spiritual people who, together with God, create the conditions for shalom and the coming of the Messiah. And the Messiah, according to that mythic tradition, cannot come unless a certain mystical number, some say 144,000, some say, it's like the 100th monkey theory. It's sort of the spiritual equivalent. A certain number, and then some window in the divine economy opens, and things go to a new place. So we can't focus on that today, but the point is simply, unconscious suffering doesn't take you anywhere. Conscious suffering is the only alternative. And it has enormous magical transformative possibilities. Yeah, and then we'll. Yeah, see, that's a whole complex. He's asking about the question about how religious traditions have often done a demonic reading of this material. And you can see how easy it is to go wrong. This is why you need wise elders that have some sense of balance in these things, you know. It's very easy to get enormously inflated in suffering, romantic about your suffering, you know. I'll get amused at the Apostle Paul. I, the chief of sinners, am. You know? I, the chief of sinners, am. And you know, there's something very romantic about victimhood. If there weren't, there wouldn't be so many people lining up to be number one victim in the world today. I mean, it's an incredible, you got to get a sense of the archetypal press behind victimhood. I mean, the attraction to, you know, to get into your identity politics and figure out who has suffered the most. Which Holocaust is most important? You're dissing my Holocaust. Well, you can't have a Holocaust. I have the only Holocaust. That is so in today, it's just amazing. The thing you're really pointing to is a basic reality that's so scary, and that is how seductive the archetypal is. And you got to see that that's what it is. It is the archetypal is not conscious. It's not really human in the sense of humanity or humane. And it is seductive, and it will suck you in to taking any form, any symbol, any form. This is where Paul Tillich is helpful. Any form, any symbol, any structure, any organization can be the locus of an archetypal inflation and start doing exactly the opposite than what Edinger is trying to help us see needs to happen. And so this is what makes this stuff so hard. And one of the things we just need to be aware of, see, that's what in the last 5 years, particularly in the last 3, I have become increasingly, it's been a sobering experience just to look at how subtle archetypal seduction is and how incredibly elegantly these archetypal energies operate like viruses. And they come in behind your eyes, and they come into a particular sector of your life, and before you know it, that archetypal virus has got you thinking you're it. And that you're causing your addiction, or you're causing your depression, or you're the one that has the rage, that's your rage. This is like Jung's idea, you don't have the complex has you. And all that I'm saying here is Edinger has helped me over the last stretch to understand how much, and this is something, remind me to come back to this, the difference between, I meant to start off today talking about the different schools of Jungian thought and how to locate Edinger. And clearly he's a classical Jungian, but some classical Jungians don't get his thing at all. They don't get this emphasis at all. They put all the emphasis on the complexes. Edinger says complexes are interesting and kind of important, but not very important. What is more important is this archetypal self-pressure on the psyche and what the psyche is doing with it. That is more important. And so this afternoon I'll try to come back and give more illustrations of that. And, you know, the game of an archetypal energy is to come into the human psyche and in the human sector, the little s self or the ego sector, and convince that person that they are wanting what the archetypal energy is wanting. And it's like if you have a problem with overeating or any other addictive pattern, I won't ask for a show of hands. But one of the things that I've been learning to do with my analyzans that have addictive patterns is to say, when you're feeling that urge, stop for a moment, following Edinger, and say, who is it that is wanting this drink? Is it the human? Or is it that big thing in you, the thing in you? And depending on the answer to that, that may help you do some containment in your behaviors. Who wants this extra pizza? And so on. So we're out of time. Let's take our lunch break now, and let's come back. I'll plan on starting right at 1:45. Let's get started on our afternoon. I would like to divide this into 2 parts. There are a number of you here who are in clinical practices of a variety of kinds and variety of settings, and but the thing that is that you hold in common is that you're working with other people, trying to facilitate them on their pilgrimage, and psychological and spiritual. So before the break, I would like us to for those of you that are here for personal growth reasons, bear with us and try to listen with your ear tuned to the ways in which what we're talking about before the break may really help you understand something of what you need from your therapist or your spiritual director, or your analyst, or from your soul friends that are working with you on your journey. Because these 2 parts this afternoon will be connected at the deepest level, but I want to focus on what persons that are in helping roles need to keep in mind if we take Edinger seriously, and just try to highlight for a little while now how different a healing practice is if you take Edinger teaching seriously from one that doesn't. They're radically different. Just because all psychotherapy and spiritual direction operates under the magician archetype, it doesn't mean that they're doing the same thing, or that they have the same sense of psychic reality just because they come under the same category in the yellow pages. So I want to focus on that, and you that are here for personal growth primarily, bear with us and try to listen and glean something out of this. And feel free to ask questions or comment as well. Then we'll take a break along about an hour from now. And then we'll come back, and I'll be happy to engage with you on your own struggles, to the extent that you feel it's appropriate to give a little phenomenology of what you're working with and how it relates to Edinger. And we will talk about implications of Edinger's work for our personal inner work, because it's huge implications. So that's what I propose to do this afternoon, and let me just start out by doing now what I intended to start out with, and I got enthusiastic about something else, and I left out. And I just want to start out, if you're trying to make sense of your own stance and style as a theorist and practitioner, as a healer, whatever the particular location, whether it's pastoral counseling or analysis or social work or spiritual direction, this was very important always to realize theory matters. Facts don't come interpreted. Empirical facts are constructed based on theoretical perspectives and paradigms. They don't even look the same to persons with different theories. The so-called facts don't even look the same, depending on what theoretical framework you bring. So theory really matters. It's not a completely wasted task to give some idea about comparative theories and about where a particular theorist could be located in the different options that exist. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but just to say, there's, even within Jungian circles now, there are a number of different sort of clusterings of attitudes about the psyche and about analysis and different assumptions. There's much more diversity than you might imagine if you're not familiar with it. And there's more overt seeming consistency than there is in fact. One place, of course, to look is that for some of the background of this is that Andrew Samuel's work that he did called Jung and the Post-Jungians. I have a number of quarrels with that book, but it's a useful book. And it frames some different emphases people make in Jungian psychology. The things I want to you should look at that to get a little background on this, Jung and the Post-Jungians. I just want to lift up some different theoretical kind of possibilities within the practice of Jungian psychology and psychotherapy that you need to think about as you try to locate Edinger and figure out what he's doing as opposed to what other people are doing. First of all, there's an idea of what is Jungian and what is post-Jungian. I think we have to be careful about the use of the word post-Jungian. A lot of people that consider themselves post-Jungians are really followers of James Hillman and Hillman's so-called archetypal psychology. And that is a point of view that really does not put almost any emphasis on the things that Edinger is talking about. And an archetype, when discussed from the point of view of Hillman's so-called archetypal psychology, bears little resemblance to what Edinger is talking about. It's very important for you to know that. You don't realize that when you read somebody that's influenced by Hillman, you will be puzzled because it will be totally different from what you're hearing from Edinger. And it is I'm trying to tell you, it is totally different. It's not the same thing. I don't really consider archetypal psychologists Jungian in any serious sense of the word. They're smart people. I'm sure they do good work, but at a serious theoretical level, it's not Jungian. Yes, I will be. That's what I'm going to get into. So, because we start out with classical Jungian psychology, what sort of thing would you believe if you were to be identified as a classical Jungian psychologist or a psychoanalyst? We have some of those around still. Not very many, but we have some. They are people, many of them do still retain a belief that such a thing as the archetypal self exists. A classical Jungian will typically believe that. A classical Jungian will also believe in some version of the collective unconscious, that there is a collective unconscious that can be studied and to some degree known, that it's not just total chaos. There are patterns in it, such as those that Edinger points out. There are some classical Jungians that follow that school that's represented by Marie-Louise von Franz, and who put tremendous emphasis on dream interpretation. And for them, in that particular school, there's these sub-schools of classical thought. In that school, the thing that makes it Jungian is that it's dream interpretation. The way of the dream. I mean, when they talk about what they do is the way of the dream. Of course, if you're a serious theoretical analyst about these matters, you know that interpreting dreams doesn't tell you anything about your theory. Freudians interpret dreams. Gestaltists interpret dreams. Archetypal psychologists interpret dreams. The way of the dream as a way of denoting what classical Jungian analysis is that's kind of misleading. It's more than just interpreting dreams. There's something about the assumptions you're bringing to the interpretation of dreams. And the assumptions that are shared by classical Jungians are usually some assumption about the collective unconscious being something that can be understood, not perfectly, but you can do pattern recognition, get some sense of the mapping of it. Another emphasis that they put on it, and this is very widespread, they put a lot of emphasis on interpreting complexes. In fact, in the early days, Jung's psychology was called complex psychology. That was one of the names for it before analytical psychology. It was called complex psychology. That is, focusing on the complexes. And so you'll find a lot of traditionally oriented Jungians who, some of them will do all this emphasis on dreams, and that'll be mostly what they do. Others will focus a lot on interpretation of complexes. What are your complexes? Your personal complexes. And let's get conscious about your personal complexes, and let's sort them out and have you become conscious of them and perhaps be somewhat disenthralled by them, liberated from them in some way. And that is something classical Jungians do. And some of them think that, so that's the way some of them practice. They almost never talk about the stuff that Edinger talks about. And they are identified as Jungians. From an analytical point of view, though a theoretician's point of view, such as mine, I look at that and I say, well, but that doesn't really make you a Jungian. Because a lot of people interpret complexes. That's what object relations theorists in Freudian tradition do all the time. Object relations theory is the theory of complexes. And Freudians in general, if you look closely at their psychology, they're doing complex psychology. That's under different labels. While many people identify as classical Jungians focus on the complex, they're doing, for one thing, that really doesn't help you differentiate what's unique about Jungian psychology, although they kind of think it does. Then you have Edinger, who is, I would say, not a post-Jungian at all, in a theoretical sense. He sees himself as an heir of Carl Jung, and he sees himself self-consciously as carrying forward Jung's fundamental revelation. And if you read these prefaces that he's written in these books, this is an apostle. You know, this man has a sense of destiny and stewardship of this, of the Jungian dispensation. See? So he is a classical Jungian, and in my view, the things that he highlights are really the things that make Jungians Jungians. And that is, while he emphasizes dream interpretation, that is not what really is the litmus test that divides, that separates Jungians from others. And while he is willing to look at personal complexes, and he does so in this writing, and does a good job of it, that's not what separates him from non-Jungians. What he does that I think is so clearly standing in the center of Jung's work is precisely his emphasis on the scientific. He sees it as a scientific quest. He is doing an empirical scientific psychology of the collective unconscious, the objective psyche. And he is seeking to make clear to people, both professionals and laypersons, what he calls the anatomy of the psyche. He intends, by virtue of his work, to lay out for us and to explain to us the way the objective psyche operates and how it impacts us, and what we need to know about it in order to have a chance in this individuation process. So Edinger is a classical Jungian, but in my view, when they call him the dean of Jungian analysts in this obituary, I take that seriously, because there is a real sense in which what is unique in Jungian psychology is clearer in Edinger's work than it is in von Franz, or than it is in many of the other people who we recognize around the country as being, as identifying themselves as classical Jungians, because he is so upfront with us in every one of these publications that he is examining in a empirical psychological scientific approach to the objective psyche. While he is interested in and concerned about people's complexes, he understands from his point of view that that is not the most important thing in analysis. That it is important to know it, it's important to look at it, it's important to get aware of it and work on them, but the most critical thing is asking the question, what is the archetypal psyche doing in me now? What is it doing to me? What is it doing in me that I'm not aware it's doing? What is it trying to do in me? What is my actual response right now to it? How is it related to my personal, quote, problems, unquote? In other words, we know now that how you frame something really matters. And what I'm suggesting to you is, you want to locate Edinger, you're right to locate him not as a post-Jungian, not as somebody that's one of the so-called clinical school of Jungian psychology, which is a misnomer. Edinger is very clinical. But he is a classical Jungian, but he's a classical Jungian who is upfront about the things in Jungian psychology that make it Jungian and not Adlerian or Freudian or Gestalt or behaviorism or any other or self-psychology in the Freudian sense, or any of those things. So when you frame Edinger's work, whether it's about psychology, psychotherapy, analysis, spiritual direction, or religion, that is the frame that you have to be conscious about. We're talking about the overarching importance of the collective unconscious. Read that objective psyche as opposed to your personal psyche. And what that objective psyche is doing with regard to the ego of your analysand, of your patient, of your spiritual directee, or of your ego in any given time. So there is the theoretical framework. He is a classical Jungian. He's not a post-Jungian. I identify myself as more in a very small niche with Anthony Stevens and perhaps a few others who I would call neo-Jungians. I'm not a classical Jungian, and I'm not a post-Jungian. I haven't thrown out Jung as the baby with the bathwater. I'm trying to take Jung's work and take seriously these assumptions that Edinger values so much. But I'm much more interested than Edinger. See, you notice in Edinger's work, he does not make any effort to relate what he's talking about to other theorists. He's not going to show you how this relates to Kohut, or how it relates to Freud, or how it relates to object relations theory, or how it relates to Adler. He is staying pretty much with the sacred text of the Black Bible of the collective works. And that's where I differ from him. And I'm simply interested in continuing what he's talking about. I'm interested in drawing on all that we have access to now to carry the scientific project forward. But I think the project is exactly as Edinger describes it. The project is to do a scientific empirical study of the collective unconscious and the objective psyche, and to use every means. The difference between me and Edinger would be that I would simply say that there's a lot of resources we have now to carry this forward that didn't exist in Jung's time, or perhaps even in Edinger's time. So as a theorist, he's a classical Jungian, and he's emphasizing the most important things in my view. So if you're raising the question, okay, now what about the implications of Edinger's work? Practically speaking, why Edinger as opposed to, say, from Franz, if you're going to have to choose between? Or why Edinger as opposed to another theorist? And if Edinger, and you're a practitioner, what questions are you going to be asking that perhaps other people would not? And so that's what I want to start with here. And let me just engage you And let's lay out a few of these together. And all of you feel free to contribute here. But you're a healer, a therapeutic practitioner, and you're going to take Edinger seriously. Tell me some of the first questions you're going to be asking concretely when you're working with a patient. Just jump in. Yes. What kind of pressure are they experiencing? What I think Gary is pointing at there is pressure from the objective psyche. Because I think that's really accurate. What kind of pressure is the patient experiencing from the objective psyche? Because from Edinger's point of view, it wouldn't be, is the patient experiencing pressure? Right? That's a given. They are experiencing an endogenous pressure from the archetypal self. It's going to be present. It's going to be trying to do what in that personality? It's going to try to come forth through the vessel of that person. That's absolutely right. And Edinger in this book and in other places refers to the incarnation process. And the reason he thinks Jesus, the story of Jesus, is so important clinically. Now, we get into his next workshop I do on this, we'll just work on the spiritual stuff as spiritual issues. But the clinical significance of Jesus in this sense is that the image of Jesus for Edinger is the paradigm of the individuating ego and the task of that individuating ego in that person. So just as the archetypal self was manifesting in the narratives about Jesus, it's trying to do that in your patient in some way. So that's fundamental. And you're going to ask that. Now, why is that important? Give me the practical side of this. What would it matter if you didn't ask that? What would be different if you didn't ask that? Come on, get practical with me here.
You know what sobriety is.
Yeah. And, well, yeah, even before that, you could even say, well, you wouldn't know that there's anything driving them. You might be a behaviorist and just think this is just learned behavior. This person is really not very interesting. They're just a kind of a inadequate personality. And there's not really anything in there. And they didn't have a very rich experience in their life, and therefore they're not very rich in their personality now, and they're just an inadequate personality, and they're boring, and they really don't deserve my time. Right? So, but if you say, from Edinger's point of view, that archetypal self is present in that person, and something is going on. And what I'm seeing manifest in my consulting room here, what you see is not really what you get. What you see is a very complex, subtle interaction between this person's attempt to become human and this huge thing looking over their shoulder. See, so it's a very different point of view. And that will have, you can see the first practical consequence right there. Because in the gaze of the therapist, when you look at that person in your consulting room, if you're coming out of Edinger's point of view, that person's a lot more interesting already. And you have not bought the persona of that person. Because you know that behind that persona, and indeed behind that presenting ego, is a lot more richness. It's huge. Whatever, no matter how that person is presenting, what is in the room with you is huge. And you better, therefore, have an attitude of reverence toward that one is with you, because you're entertaining angels unawares there. so to speak. And the humility, the needed humility, the analyst is to be real clear that, you know, I give people that see me the Milan multi-axial clinical inventories. And I do that just to try to be humble, realizing I may miss a lot, and usually do, and that'll help me. But if you have an Edinger point of view, if you're informed by Edinger, you'll take any test you have on a person and you'll take that with a 100-pound sack of salt. You'll know what they are on the DSM-4. Axis 1, diagnosis, axis 2, so on. But you will not assume that that is the fullness, the pleroma of what's in the room with you. And I take it that that's a radically significant thing for the therapist, because it has a lot to do with how open the therapist is going to be toward watching the activity of a transpersonal agent in the room that's not the ego of the person I'm sitting with. What would happen, in practical terms now, what would happen if the therapist was not doing their own work with regard to this? And to the extent that the therapist is in fact not working on what Edinger is telling us to work on in their own inner work, then there will be a tendency for there to be much more powerful archetypal projection in the room, in the consulting room. And the therapist it can happen also a variety of ways, and this is what you'd have to look at in a particular clinical supervision of a particular case, because it doesn't manifest the same way all the time. For example, if I get into my grandiosity and I'm not aware of it, and look at that book called Guggenbuhl Craig, Power in the Helping Professions, and the way in which the therapist will get into, I'll get into my great magician inflation. I'm the healer, you're the healee. And when I am in that, I am really not open to being a vessel for the self, because I am identified with the magician aspect of the self. And and then if the patient needs something from me that is not consistent with my identification with the archetypal self in that form, then I will attack the patient. And there will be what we call a negative countertransference to the patient. On the other hand, if I'm feeling particularly depleted, I'm in one of those alienated places, and I'm not feeling like the great magician, I may idealize the patient without knowing it. Suddenly, they may be the vessel of the archetypal self for me, and I can have an archetypal transference, actually a transference, which we call a countertransference, but it's just an archetypal transference to them, and I will idealize either their sex life, their intellectual life, their work life, their capacity to do nothing. Whatever about them that I can idealize, I will, and that's not helpful either. So you can see the subtlety of that, and so the only defense against that really is for the analyst to be working in their own inner work with this type of thing as much as they can. Well, certainly it manifests in ways that the patient will assume are their subjectivity. They will experience as their subjectivity. But when you're looking at this, when Edinger says objective psyche, or Jung, they're talking about the non-personal unconscious. And for Jung and Edinger, that is huge part of the unconscious, and it has heavily determining influences on the forms your complexes take. And so while I, as a patient, you're my analyst, I experience all of this stuff as subjective and my subjective personal experience. Much of it is really not my personal experience. Much of it is a possession state by an archetypal content. So when they use the word objective, they mean something very specific. They're talking about what Noam Chomsky would call deep structures. They're real structures in the mind. Now, what else would you say would a therapist operating with influence from Edinger, what else would they be concerned about that perhaps some other therapist or analyst might not be? You've said some of the things. What are some other things?
It's like about the way on and up fiber.
Right. Okay. So the analyst would ask precisely the question that you're just lifting up. The analyst would say, where is the person in this psychic metabolism? Where are they? Not only where are they in their life cycle with this, but where are they today in it? Are they in a state of connection with these grandiose energies? If you were sufficiently empathic, would you be able to make room for them to show you the exhibitionism that they really came in today wanting to show you? Or are they in a particular place where they're feeling guilty about having been exhibitionistic and are trying to get away and hide and kind of hide in a depression? So that's a very important point. Where is the person right now in terms of this cycle, or what might become a cycle if you broke them loose in their process? Are they fixated? Are they cycling? If they're cycling, can you look back at what you know about them and recognize any patterns in their cycling? If you can recognize the patterns in their cycling, what are the characteristic patterns in their cycling? There's where you're doing your differential diagnosis. Is this a person that has a very wide swinging cycle? 6 months, they're down in kind of a real bad depression. And then 5 months later, it's coming up, and they're getting a little manicky. And then it goes, or is it a short cycle? Because that matters. That tells you how much structuralization in this personality there is to help them keep from cycling so much. So that's very important. That's a very important part in your assessment. But so in your assessment task, you ask what's going on, and you ask where is this in any kind of psychic metabolism for this person. Is this person is chronically depressed in the chronic alienated state? Because everybody has got a different trajectory on this stuff, and it's very important. You don't treat everybody the same way. That's the important thing. It's very important in this kind of work to try to understand exactly what is going on with this person, because it is not all over the place. There is a recognizable pattern that the therapist or healer has to discern before they can have some sense about what to do. What else would you, as a healer, want to pay attention to in this, new practitioner? Remember, that's different from what you would be called upon to do if you were a Hellmanian. Oh, they do a lot of stuff. Hellmanians have very sophisticated approaches to dream, for example. Very sophisticated approaches to working with dreams and other material. They're just not looking for the same thing that somebody operating out of Edinger we looked upon, because they really don't believe they're an objective psyche. So, in this sense at all. So what else would you look for? Now, some of you have read his alchemy stuff. I assume that would be relevant. Is there any insight that you might have out of his work on alchemy about what a therapist would do or be concerned about? That's something you want to look at if you're a clinician. What he does there is he emphasizes the different movements that are aspects of the transformative process in every personality, but the different personalities are at different places depending on what you see happening in your room, what's happening to them in your room. For example, some personalities are too wet, too much solutio. They don't have any boundaries. They just kind of flow all over everything. They can't become formed. In my work, I talk about that as a kind of a lover flooding. Lover energy is very flooding. Lover energy is very wet. So Edinger says, well, look, you need to know sometimes a person needs more solution, more solutio. Some of us dry, obsessive, compulsive types. You know, you need to kind of wetten us up a little bit. But other people, you don't want to get them more into wetness. There are people who are already so wet and in touch with their feelings, all their wetness comes out their eyes a lot. There are a lot of therapists that if you're already running with solution, they'll push you more into your feelings. That's not a good idea. Catharsis does not heal. It doesn't change the fundamental structures in the psyche. Catharsis releases energy temporarily. And actually, it may push one toward a disorganization, even a terminal disorganization. Edinger would say, okay, sometimes you need the alchemical process for a patient. If they're too wet, you need to have some calcinatio. You need to turn up the heat. You need to find ways for them to dry out. And that is very specific. You know, if you're trying to get someone to dry out, you don't push them down into wet feeling areas. You use techniques which help them find the edges, find the boundaries, find the corners, find the firmness. Another thing he talks about in that alchemy book, Anatomy of the Psyche, is separatio. And he would be asking, where are the places where this person is merged in unconscious ways with the archetypal self, other people, institutions, ideas? Where are the, what he would call, inferior conjunctio, the unconscious marriages of that person with things in the world? Is their marriage one in which they are merged? Do they need to get into energies of separation so that they can begin to individuate? Do they need to separate from their job some, from their career? You know, do they need to separate, say, if I'm a fundamentalist, whatever? Do I need to understand that I may need to separate a little bit from my compulsive religious behavior? So his alchemical stuff is very, very practical for a practicing clinician. It's part of differential diagnosis so that you can know what kind of alchemical process the person needs to be involved in, so that when you're helping them have a treatment plan, you are working on a treatment plan that really addresses the problem, not treating everybody the same way. So the alchemy stuff is extremely practical. It's not just esoteric Jungiana. It's a very practical thing if you look at it. I do think Dr. Edinger perhaps was a little inflated when he called that the anatomy of the psyche. It's really more fairly, it is processes of transformation, or different aspects of the transformative process. One of the things that I think is a limitation of Edinger's work is he really does not put enough attention to what the anatomy of the psyche is. He doesn't have a very clear sense of the shape of all this grandiosity. And what I've tried to do in my work is to try to get a lot clearer about the different forms that grandiosity takes so that we can map them out better. But clearly, he understands that different patterns in a personality require different therapeutic interventions that are mapped out in alchemy. What else would you add?
Well, if I understand, that's talking about sort of
So believe, you're dealing with,
Sure.
spiritual.
Yeah.
How do you do this? And if man has an innate archetype for the divine or the spiritual, how do you know when you introduce that?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just staying with the side of a practical, the healer's practical concern here, and you'd say why, or you would say from Edinger's point of view, you would have to be concerned about that, right? That would not really be sort of optional. You would have to be concerned about that. Now, why would you have to be concerned about that if you're going to help any person? See, what is there about this particular point of view that would require that, whereas in some other point of view it might be optional? What is there about the assumptions here? Remember the sacrifice thing down at the bottom? Yeah, the whole archetypal self, is the way Edinger frames it, really is, it's about the experience of the transcendent. That is what transcends the ego. Absolutely, that's right. But I think that the simple answer is that from this point of view, you have to go for the ego self-axis. You have to go consciously to, it is imperative that the healer strategize concretely with this person. How can I help this person begin to disidentify with the archetypal self? That is a spiritual enterprise, because as long as I am identified with the archetypal self, I see no need for any spiritual practice whatsoever, really. Or if I'm involved in a spiritual practice, it's about my spiritual narcissism. It's like, I'm proud I'm this religion rather than that. I was lecturing at the World Parliament of Religion in South Africa on this topic of spiritual narcissism, where we take our grandiosity from the archetypal self and we will transfer that to our religious tribe. And I will be humble, but I will be defending my particular religious tribe's right to lord it over all the rest of the others. See? And that kind of approach to spirituality is not the ego self-axis type of thing that Edinger's talking about. In fact, when we get around to really working on his ideas, his spiritual ideas about what is needed in the world, he's really talking about every person assuming their part in the formation of a conscious relationship, a conscious ego self-axis. That is the key to his whole spiritual vision. So in terms of practical psychotherapy, why is it that I have to do that with this patient? Because the longer I delay helping them work on this ego self-axis, this ego archetype axis, what's going on if I'm delaying that? What is the practical implication? Somebody take a risk, jump in. What is the practical danger? Yes, and it's remaining unconscious. The person you're collaborating. You're really kind of codependent. You're kind of collaborating in their continued identification with the archetypal self. And you're not making any intervention which could help them open a door to differentiation, separatio from the archetypal self. It's like it would be impossible to express how urgent it is to help a person, any person, begin to disidentify with the archetypal self. It would be almost impossible to exaggerate the importance of that. Because to the extent that they are identified with it, they are doomed. That's what I meant to put this up. This is a good time to put this up here. You got, according to Edinger, there's two images that show the great divide here. the great abyss. The two routes. You can be like Jonah, or you can be like Ahab. Those are the two choices. This is why he wrote a book on Moby Dick, and this is why he wrote on all these Leviathan, all these monster images, sea monster images. The reason I got interested in this recently was that I've been working on this dragon mythology. I'm convinced that dragon mythology, East and West, is really about all this. And that if you study dragon mythology and you understand that, Christians have tried to slay the dragon, but that does not work. You really can't slay it. You try to slay the dragon, you've got an Ahab problem. You've got to wake up and try to do the Jonah thing. You got to come to, on your way to Nineveh. You have to come to. So, do you get that? I don't know whether some of you may not know these stories, but this is from Moby Dick. And this is Edinger's way of saying that the archetypal self will turn to you the face that you turn to it. So if you try to kill it or deny it, it will come up from the depths and it will wreck your boat. It will sink you, it will kill you, and you will go down with it. And you may take your entire ship down with it, your entire community, your entire planet may go down with you. Or you can come to in the belly of the beast and you can say, oh my God, here I am, now I'm in the belly of the beast. Truth is, in Jonah, he had been in the belly of the beast. He just didn't know it. Whenever we're possessed by our grandiosity, we are in the belly of the beast. And we don't know it. The task is, like Jonah, to wake up in the belly of the beast and pray. The Bible scholars have all tried to figure out, how can it be Jonah prays a prayer of thanksgiving for deliverance while he's still in the belly of the beast? The Bible scholars say, that must be a mistake. Some editor put that in there and that was wrong. The truth is, if you read it through Edinger, of course it's right. Deliverance only comes when you wake up and you experience metanoia and humility, and you offer a prayer of sacrifice, a sacrificial prayer from the belly of the beast. And you can express thanksgiving even if you're in the belly of the beast. And that's what liberates you from its grasp, yes.
Is that the problem with the Zomanians, is that they don't try to get a disidentification with the archetypal? So?
Well, that's one of the problems with the Zomanian. It's like, but it's a big one, because you see, if you buy into that sort of anti-theory, there really isn't any way for you to be humble. There's no way to disidentify, because there's nothing to disidentify with. So you kind of, in that kind of approach, the ego sort of retains its mastery. I mean, you can't have an ego self-axis if there's no archetypal self.
Even at the time when they're saying, let the soul be whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's a whole other thing. But I mean, just at the level of a theoretical reflection about why are humor and prayer so important to human beings, no matter what tradition they're in. And you can just look at this and see, because if you can laugh, there's no more powerful antidote to your inflation than laughter. And especially if you can laugh at yourself, if you can just look at how ridiculous the situation you're in is, and how ridiculous it is that you've gotten yourself into this. Humor, in that sense, being able to laugh at yourself, is more powerful probably than prayer. Because the reason it's probably more powerful than prayer is that it's pretty easy to kind of get proud of your prayer, So anyway, that is what's at stake. If I do not help my analysand or the person I'm working with get conscious and do some things that will help them try to establish, you can't do it for them, but will help them try to establish it. I'll investigate with analysands. I'll say, do you have any philosophical commitments against prayer? Some people do. And if they do, that's a problem for them. But you can work with them in other ways. But if they don't have any objections to prayer, I recommend that they pray. And that's like the 12-step kind of, I don't care what you call this great one you pray to. In fact, you might do an active imagination and ask them what their name is, But to begin a dialogue with the other in the unconscious is extremely important. Now here, this is why. Now look, for someone coming out of this point of view, a lot of people do dream interpretation, but if you're doing this point of view, you can see why in a therapeutic work or healing work, dream interpretation would be very important, right? It's not just sort of kind of optional. If a person cannot work with their dreams, you got to worry about them. Many people can't. Here, this is why active imagination is so important. Because say you are not getting any dreams, and you and I have not been able to work together long enough to figure out why. It may be that you're on some kind of medication that is interfering with dreams. Or it may be something more dangerous. Some more archetypal inflation. See, because there are kinds of archetypal inflation that really shut down the dream life. But here's where Jung's work again, active imagination, is so central. You can try to do active imagination. That is to start trying to initiate dialogues with the unconscious. Of course, if you're real inflated, which often we are, it's very difficult to do it. Why? Why is it difficult to do active imagination? Yeah. Well, if you don't have any respect for the other in your psyche that is not you, you don't have to worry about being respectful, it's like, what's to respect? Who's to talk to when I'm going to sleep at night? But if you have knowledge about this objective reality, and you know that if you go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning without, in effect, saying hello, you can begin to see the inflation you're in. I'm going to pretend you do not exist. See? I'm going to pretend that my unconscious mind is not a factor here. I'm going to live my day as if I'm not in any danger of being overwhelmed by my grandiosity. But if you can help a person to say, look, when let's develop a personal ritual in which let's decide how you will begin to try to open up this archetypal dialogue. And we will not expect quick success. See, this is that sacrificial element we were talking about earlier. That is understanding how much effort there is in doing this inner work. It doesn't just happen. It's a lot of work. And I'm always interested in how long it takes to help someone get up the consciousness they need to actually work with their dreams, or to actually work with active imagination in a serious way. It's a lot of effort. You ask me, well, what are we talking about here with sacrifice? That's it. The sacrifice to your objective psyche is showing it the respect that you will give it X number of minutes a day, seeking to put out a welcome mat for dialogue. You see that? It is very horrifying and fascinating how difficult it is for people to do this, even when you're trying to help them. And what I've learned more and more over the last few years is how empathic I need to be with that. rather than being angry at my analysan because they're not doing it. I have to be conscious of what they're dealing with. They're in a war. They're in a struggle to get enough room for their little human self that they can have the energy available to try to start to found this ego self-axis. And it is excruciatingly difficult for most people to get that wiggle room in there between them and the art. Do you get that? Am I making any sense to you? You got to feel that. It's not something you can just kind of abstract about. You got to feel how hard it is for a person to make that human space they need, to get a space in there, start creating a space between them and the archetypal, so there can be a relationship, get beyond a merger to a relationship with it. Other comments, question, reflection? Yes.
Well, I heard during movement, I think did a book at the inspection food these how the development and there were that and that.
What do you think Marion is thinking of right there? The fattened calf. What do you think she's getting at? She's a wise owl. I'm Minerva. What do you think she's pointing to there? Do you have a thought?
You were saying that there, days that have to go.
Yes.
You're going to make that kind of time.
Yeah.
They,
Yeah.
they're thinking,
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Marion is a very wise person. She has a real sense of what we're talking about. She is not one that minimizes how difficult this is. She has lived it. She knows. And this reminds me, what you're saying reminds me of one of Rumi's poems, where he says, keep a lean donkey. Ride on a lean donkey. What he's talking about there is how he's talking about the way that instinctual expressions of this grandiosity will creep up on you, and you won't even be aware of how fat's your donkey yourself, your ego. You won't even be aware of how out of control it is. And that you've got in your spiritual life, you've got to put that thing on a diet. And the thing that Edinger adds is an understanding of the dynamics of this. That fat donkey that threatens to destroy your life is not really your human person. It is an invasion of archetypal contents that threaten to colonize your whole life. Now this Edinger, if you read between the lines everywhere in his work, he knows this, he assumes it, but I just want to make it more explicit. You really have to be aware that the archetypal psyche is not always friendly. Sometimes it's Moby Dick. And sometimes it will come up under your boat and eat the whole thing. And particularly if it's not respected. So you've got this thing that will come in, and then once it is in, and there is no conscious work on ego self-connection, where you're trying to be a dialogue partner, a lifelong dialogue partner. See, that's what people don't want to sign up for. This is too much trouble. Isn't there some easier way? I often have a few very grandiose people come to see me, just once in a while. And sometimes they have huge financial resources, but they really feel like they should be able, I should be able to do this quickly. Yeah. Right, 6 sessions. So that's a lot, actually, I had a person call me up recently and say, could I have a 15-minute consultation with you? Unbelievable. Oh, well, probably. Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, I might be able, Harry was just telling me something that he was able to say in one short session that it helped. So sometimes it does. But in any case, that ego self-axis, that is something that, this is the old ritual elder role. This is your shamanic role as a healer. And you as a healer, I mean, some of the healing process will happen just with your being there, but sometimes some technical knowledge is needed, and part of it would be, what are some of the techniques we can try, just experimentally, with this patient to help them begin disidentifying and forming a relationship with this unconscious. So that's really key. Any other thing you would add that a therapist would want to keep in mind? Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking earlier, the difficulty in making space between ego and archetype.
Right.
And I started to think, and things what you were doing is ardent building cohort emphasis upon empathy.
Yes.
With a person who just can't.
Right.
Actually, we get
Right.
month up to month.
Right.
And isn't able to actualize, engage any of the ideas they put. We just steady with fold.
Right.
Yeah. I'll put that in.
Right. Gary's talking about the role of empathy with a person that's having a struggle in this, and it's because if you don't let Edinger teach us how powerful this is, what is being struggled with, what a sacrificial task this is, how huge it is, then it's easy to get mad at an Alazan. You ask them to do an active imagination with this dream, and they come back the next week or the next session, and they haven't done it. Well, what's going on here? Well, it's very easy to over-interpret the competence of that personality and assume that they could have done it. The truth is often precisely that they cannot do it yet. They cannot do it yet. And what you're talking about is the appropriate empathy of the analyst or healer to realize how huge this task is that's being asked. It doesn't look huge from the outside, but in their inner world, they have not got the wiggle room yet to push back a little bit against that archetype. You really got to get a sense for the way this thing operates. The archetypal self will totally colonize your human life, and there won't be any human life left. And I could point to you innumerable cases where people are being totally dominated by the archetypal self. Now, they think they're just ambitious, or that they just want to succeed in this or that or the other. And they have no awareness that what they think is their ambition is an invasion of this archetypal content. They can never rest. There's no rest at all for them. They can never be off.
But that's the conditioning of all of it. I mean, that's the beginning, that's the condition of all of it, until we wake up.
Well, yeah, and it manifests in different forms and different degrees of seriousness. And I just recommend pretty soon they're supposed to have my Archetype Compulsion and Healing tapes available. And that's what I was addressing in that workshop here recently. Some of you were there. About being able to look and differentiate, do some differential diagnosis about how this manifests in different persons, because it's not all the same. It is a similar process. But for some people, it's much more, they're much more driven than others. That is, you look, that's one of the things the therapist needs to do in diagnosing with a case. How driven is this person? Where is the compulsivity in this personality? And following your point, you follow Edinger. You don't say, is there any compulsivity in this personality? You ask, where is the compulsivity? what form is the compulsivity taking? Because it doesn't all look like an obsessive compulsive. There are forms of compulsivity that look like laziness, if you're naive. But they are compulsively lazy. They are not lazy. In effect, the personality is being lazied by an archetypal content. So that's, in principle, it's the same thing. The thing that I want to carry forth beyond Edinger is that we can know a lot more about the forms this takes than he talks about. When you have a person in your office or you're working with someone, and you have they're depleted, they come in, they present depleted. You have to ask, what is this that I am seeing? What is this a mark of? Here's another thing that is that we have to nuance, and when we're interpreting Edinger, he will call it an alienated state when you're depressed, for example. And
Well, you just ingrained over the both.
well, the important thing for you to understand is grandiosity is present in both. That's the important thing to understand. And that is one of the limitations of Edinger's way of talking about this. That is, the person who is depressed is not really alienated from the archetypal self. It's very close to them. It's just they're not conscious of it. They are in a relationship to it where they have to be denying the great side of it. They're feeling crushed by it. See, when you're depressed,
Still in him what Edinger was saying and stuff, but
it is different. That's what I say. That's a different take on it. That is to say, what we know now from other studies of narcissism is that, say, when you're experiencing shame, it doesn't mean you're alienated from your grandiosity. When you're experiencing shame, your experience of shame is masking a tremendous unconscious grandiosity that's present in the psyche. So what you're talking about, see, the phenomenology, the conscious presence of the person, their conscious presence they will be consciously inflated like a narcissistic personality disorder. Or they will be consciously depressed like a depressive personality, depressive dysthymia. But what we need to understand is that doesn't mean the archetypal self is far away when you're depressed.
no, but I still think they remain very different from each other, and you
They are different in the presentation.
it not just when contemplating,
Yeah.
but in what went wrong with the first plate and what you
How so? How are they different?
I'm thinking with Edinger, because I'm not here.
Okay.
I thought if I have came correctly at the one case, and maybe the person is not the burden that it is not alcoholical and they're not. They haven't been deflated because they haven't met out the reality that says, that Lewis the apple one feels we get the correct doing.
Right. They have not been punctured. The inflation has not been punctured. That's right.
And the other, and I would think what that person needs is very different. The person means their parents did indeed correct them,
Right.
but were never available for the reconciliation, leading to correcting stuff.
Well, they need a different intervention. That's right. But what you've got to see is, and this is true for Edinger, not just for me, they are still merged with the archetypal self at the deepest root. The merger is still the problem. And so the task is for the connection, the conscious connection, to be, that has still got to happen. In his view, it is a series of punctures and inflations and punctures and inflations and punctures and inflations of the consciousness that is going to happen before that ego self-axis is established and secure. But the important thing is to look at that diagram. I don't have it out here, but the second diagram where it shows the progression of from the merger to the to the ego self is two circles touching. The important thing is to understand that in the cycling of inflation, depletion, you're still merged. That's the important thing to understand, that the fundamental underlying problem is still there. And you're just cycling, as the Adlerians, Harry, used to say, you're either Caesar or you're shit. You're Caesar, you're shit. You're Caesar, you're shit. And the underlying superiority complex is still there. And you just cycle back and forth. And so the important thing, I think, for us to realize, and this is important clinically, is to understand that, and this helps you to understand the importance of sacrifice when you're down, because it's important to understand that when you're depressed and really down, that doesn't mean you're not grandiose. In fact, it probably means you're being crushed by an unconscious relationship to the archetype. So that is precisely when to make an offering of some kind, and to, burn some incense, take some tobacco out to the local tree, as our shaman friends do. Offer it to the tree spirit. When you're depressed, that's a good time to do it. You won't feel like sacrificing when you're inflated, most of the time. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about personal journey issues around this stuff, and then we will take about 5 minutes, stretch your legs, and come on back. Well, let's get started on our last segment here, where we're talking about this in relationship to our own individuation process. And I'd just like to start out with just a few comments about that, and then invite you to share your reflections on this. And here, let me turn again to an anticipation of this archetype of the apocalypse thing, because if we really get at what Edinger is trying to tell us, he's really saying here, there are great forces that are trying to bring powerful regeneration in you. Something very powerful is attempting to bring about a new creation in you. In other words, if you turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to that great force, you may end up with your boat sunk. We may have an acted out nuclear holocaust or some other kind of catastrophe. Edinger fears that. But the larger possibility that he's really talking about is these great forces that really want more for us. They want redemption. They want a new heaven and a new earth. A new man and a new woman. A new man and a new woman that are far more complete than any man or woman that our species has ever put on the earth before. Edinger has a wide-ranging view of history, and he looks at this long evolutionary process and this huge, long struggle of our species. And he sees all the failed experiments and all the tragedies and, the roads not taken and so on. But he has not lost hope for us, our species, or for you or for me. And it's very important for us at this point to engage with how large his view is of what you and I might be. Gene Houston talks about the possible human. Well, Edinger has this huge view about the possible human. And he believes it's not just a matter of our individual creativity out of the ego. he believes there is this enormous force, this evolutionary impetus that is trying to get us to go forward in death and rebirth into something much more whole, much more beautiful. Steve asked me to say something about what I meant by the distinction between joy and happiness. You know, in this Edinger context, it would be saying that there's something that's possible in you that's far larger and deeper than the mere happiness of your ego about some particular event or some particular success or some particular state in a relationship or in a career or something. It's like the idea of the golden flower. The golden flower is really in you, and it is trying to be born. You know, that whole stuff in this book about the golden cup of the apocalypse. There is this golden cup of the apocalypse that is present now. It's present in your personality. And what does it hold in it? Well, it's got all your addictions in it. Your golden cup has got all your addictions, all your compulsions, all your symptoms, all these things which you might be tempted to merely pathologize. And he's saying that all of these sort of manifestations of the underside of the great self are prima materia of the alchemical process. And if you understand that this is a golden cup, that stuff you're struggling with in your individuation journey now is really prima materia. It is not evil in itself. You know, as he and Jung like to say, it's an unconscious God trying to get born. And once you understand that, you may have a different attitude toward your struggle. You may see a deeper dimension of meaning. And there may become actually an experience of joy, which is a deeper sense of connection to the eternal, to that with the poroma, Jung's idea of the fullness, that you are connected to the fullness, no matter what may have gone wrong this week. There's a radiance that is possible, and in fact is in you, if you begin to cultivate eyes to see it. Now, that's an incredible word, and you know, think about what is your reaction to listening to Edinger lift that up for you. I mean, on your own journey. I mean, what is your reaction to that? So you probably have a lot of different reactions to it, depending on where you are in your journey. It's an invitation for you to be filled out, you know, archetypally, into a greater wholeness. But what is your personal response to that as you hear Edinger lifting that up? Anybody, just jump in. You know, what comes to your mind about that as you try to live your life every week? Responsibility. All right. Mm-hmm. In the sense of, you mean if there's some really good stuff yet unborn here, what does this mean? What is my responsibility for this? Yeah. I love that, the golden weed, he said. Or you should be able to understand the problem and fix it. But I'm just struck by your golden cup of golden weed, golden flower, golden weed. And see, that gets us back to that issue about the sickness of infinity, about all the possibilities that just crush us. We got all these possibilities, and we've got to figure out what we're going to actualize and what we're going to choose not to actualize in this life, in this round, in this incarnation. That's golden weed. That's beautiful. See, the golden weed is something that really is attractive that I really should weed out. Now, it's very interesting. And discerning that is an incredible challenge. And at best, you make mistakes on that sometimes. I just went through a period in my life when I realized that I had been pouring enormous energy into certain directions that were worthwhile, but really were not the direction that I needed to go. So I was doing a lot of watering and fertilizing of some golden weeds. And so I have spent a little time in a depleted state recently, having to cope with all of the energy that I had put into some of those attractive, wonderful golden weeds. And I really think you're right about that. See, he's talking about the need to discern when you need to really face that door that in effect synchronicity or providence is telling you not to go there. And you would say, I don't want to hear that. I've got too much invested in that. So that's very interesting. And now there is the practical spirituality and practical individuation thing right there. Because, another thing that he emphasizes over and over and over again in his work, this is about being individual. This particular unique individual, he even talks about that thing in this Apocalypse book. He talks about, your name is written in heaven. And what he means by that is, he believes that there is sort of an image of the actualized individual that you might be, which would have eliminated those golden weeds and really made those sacrifices and those choices and really cultivated that flower that really is your destiny, what you really need to be doing. And now that's a very spiritual thing there. That's getting into theology and ontology and all sorts of things there. We'll come back to that when we look at his spiritual significance more. But I think that's very important to practically speaking, looking at your life. Here you are at this phase of your life. Where are the golden weeds? Where are the things that are taking your energy and your lifeblood and your money and your time that you really need to say goodbye to? They may be relationships. They may be certain career aspirations. They may be degree programs. They may be book projects. They may be whatever. But that's one really important thing to do. Because, see, if you start working on that, what is it that I need to get rid of? That is a way of doing the separatio and the sacrifice and the acceptance of limitation. See, individual humans are limited. That archetypal self is not. That's one of the hard things of incarnation. When you come into incarnation, you can't be all things to all people. And that's hard. What else comes to your mind as you think about your own individuation journey in the light of Edinger's work? You mean that if you took this seriously, the actual inner work, the actual work that would be required to create and sustain and monitor and nurture that ego self-axis, I think that's right. And that's what I really came to when you were asking the question about sacrifice and thinking about what's this really about. Just right. The most practical thing is just the sacrifice that you're talking about. Actual libido that you take and you divert from the pressures of the day, and you divert that libido and you channel that libido into this project. And rather than just expecting it to happen, I work with people trying to get them to use, say, Covey's work and trying to get them to schedule important things, including this type of thing. But face the fact that you actually have to schedule this. You actually have to set a time when you're going to do an appointment with yourself, literally. Schedule an appointment with the self to do this work. I was fascinated. I had not remembered him talking like this, but he talks like this. He says, it's very typical that people will look at these narcissistic behaviors, addictive behaviors, compulsive behaviors, all this sort of thing, and they will see them only as pathology. And that is not the way he sees them. He sees them more like you. He doesn't romanticize about it, but he said, this stuff carries. This is the body of God. This is the body of God. And it's important to take it in and metabolize it and cook it in the alchemical furnaces of the psyche. And then the gold comes from that. Then the true gold comes from that. And I think you're just saying that you really have experienced that you have experienced the gold coming from that. In my system of thought, I would call that lover gold. Lover gold, that a lot of those things manifest in those seemingly destructive forms, but it's the same energy that leads to one being a Rumi, a Sufi mystic. It's the same energy. Okay. Other reflections about the challenge of individuation if you take Edinger seriously. What is your personal response to that? Where does it meet you? What does it raise up as your challenge? He's bringing up the cultural unconscious and pointing out that there is a dialogue not only with the I and the archetypal, the objective psyche or collective unconscious, there's also a cultural unconscious that he gets in here in the mix. And you've got to differentiate the voices. What are these voices? If you are a woman, there are particular messages that have been coded culturally about what you are to be and what you're not to be, the particular forms that wholeness can take in you. And one of the things that Edinger's saying, particularly in the Apocalypse book, is that that's all under judgment. The cultural stuff is all under judgment by the archetypal psyche. And that just as our personalities are under judgment in terms of what we've left out, the cultural psyche is under judgment in terms of what it leaves out for women, and I would say for men too. I mean, the cultural unconscious warps both the personalities of men and women. And we can add minorities and people of different sexual persuasions. Culture does all sorts of things that influences their sense of wholeness. So that's a very important point. Thank you for that. Being used to saying, is this me or not? Or who is this talking? And that's a big part of the discernment process. Other reflections, comments? Yes, back here. Privatizations of prison, see, making it into capitalism. Well, you're like a lot of doctors today, because medicine has become the same thing. And so you've got the medical industrial complex and you've got the prison industrial complex, and doctors want out. The legal is not industrial, but it's a complex. And the lawyers want out. Isn't that interesting? The professionals in our society are all wanting out because of what's happening in their particular place. Well, yeah, we don't want to get too much into that except to say that there are very powerful economic forces that are pushing our states toward methods of dealing with crime and addiction and so forth that are extremely expensive for the society economically, which do not rehabilitate prisoners and are focused on the profit motive. And there's too many lobbyists for these companies that are determining policy in our governments, and it's happening off the radar. And the same thing is true about the medical industrial complex. And if you look into the total justice, so-called justice system, this is what Edinger's talking about in this book, the Apocalypse book, about the
incredible cultural, civilizational trends of deterioration that these are symptomatic of. Edinger wants to say there's hope beyond this. Now, I'd be interested to see what you think, and maybe if you do that March workshop, they'll get into that there. Does Edinger expect there to be a great catastrophe, and then from the ashes, Phoenix will rise? Gee, I sure would hope that we could head that off, by concerted effort. But I think Edinger's worried, or was worried, that it was going to go down first. And see now, in terms of Edinger's work, this is in the public sphere, and this is very important. I want to stay with our particular individuation journeys. This is obviously, though, related. Edinger's capacity to look at things symbolically that don't present themselves as symbolic processes is important here, because all this stuff is tremendously laden with archetypal significance. All of these trends in our culture are archetypally significant, and they are spiritually full of significance. And I guess one thing I would say to you, what concerns me spiritually in terms of my own individuation is, well, how do I use his insights to be stronger in terms of having the wherewithal to engage my piece of this process, because it's always been demanding to try to be psychologically mature and spiritually responsible, but I don't think it's ever been any harder than it is now. So one of the things that comes to me is, well, what's the good news here? Well, there's a lot of kind of scary stuff that's not so good news if you want a Pollyannish answer. But he does have some, he is saying that if you will open yourself to it, you will find inner resources. There really are springs that will refresh you, that you in fact are in contact with, whether you accept it or not. And the question is, how do you turn the valves and open yourself to that? So, we've got a little time left. Any other reflections that you'd like to share? What is Edinger's legacy for you on your own individual quest? Now, some of you walked with him a long time. And that, I'm not saying something that you just found out last week. What has been his legacy to you as you go forward? Any other thoughts? Well, that is exactly what Edinger's getting at in that last part. You were having there an experience of acceptance, and I would just say that that prayer, your comment about that prayer praying itself, that's the ego self-axis. That's exactly what that is, because it's like the great mystics of different traditions have always pointed out that when you really start being in touch with the divine does the praying through you. So that is an example. The only thing let me just say that I think that is an invitation to you, though, to continue to practice your prayer. And you may find that really helpful.
Kind of getting more maybe about 4 years ago in my therapy, without knowing what I said, about knowing what I meant, I said to myself, that's it.
Right, when I'm cured.
I think of the days of that. Knowing that I'd ever teach 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't go along there, and I said that. I say at the time, I probably think of whatever came up to this event to have a copy of right. Terrence. Like to say one or basing up time, so because that was not that point.
Right.
And much more listening, like talking with God there.
Yeah.
Was able kind of listening to that.
Yeah. And you may be able to down here at the bottom of the circle, you may be able to pray precisely when you don't feel like you're worthy to pray. That would be the sacrificial attitude. And so it sounds like you are having some powerful experiences with the self. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. Anybody else that's got a comment or an insight that they'd like to share? We've got about 15 minutes. This is really, one of the implications of all this is clearly that individuation is not a professional process and can't be turned into a franchise of psychotherapists and Jungian analysts. It really is, well, we're all in this together, in other words. Right. What you're describing would be staying in kind of an inflated state, sort of like a pampered child sometimes, a little prince. That would be an example of that kind of thing. Yes. Avoiding tasks that might bring failures. Yeah. The knowledge itself, look, I'm the last person, I've been possessed by the magician most of my life, so I'm the last person to underemphasize the importance of the knowing. I think knowing is important. But it's also clear to me that knowing this framework is really important and potentially liberating, because the way he frames it, there are powerful forces trying to spring you out of your ego prison. There are powerful forces trying to expand your life. Now you're afraid of those. I'm afraid of them because if I really get out of my grandiosity, then I have to work. And as the Adlerians, Harry had to leave, but as the Adlerians would say, I have to learn the courage to be imperfect. Because if I really do anything, then I may fail. But anyway, the work is kind of scary. But the good news is, there's tremendous potential for you to move out of the box. And there are some techniques which can actually, including prayer, which can help you get that fueling you need for that. And one of the things that I emphasize a lot in working with people is baby steps, baby steps. It's extremely important to take any of these challenges we're facing and break them down into wheat check size tasks so that we're not so overwhelmed. Now, what else were you thinking about there? Was there something else that you were... Yeah, that's all interesting to somebody when they just don't have anything else to do and want to think about this. I think about that stuff a lot, but it's important not to get mesmerized by all the archetypal complexity, because that just shuts you down, that just immobilizes you. It's good to know that there's this incredible richness just beyond your ego's edge, and then you're connected with. And that you're connected with all of these incredible symbolic riches of the whole species, and probably other species that we don't even know about. You're connected with that. But as you're nurturing your little habitat where you can live as a human person, it's important to have that contact, but not let it be flooded by those archetypal images. And I think sometimes we get overwhelmed by all the stuff we should know. It's in your hardwiring. It's down there in your files. You don't need to have them all up at one time on the screen. So I think the important thing, the thing I realized lately is make sure you take the side of your human self, little s self, against all this huge stuff. And you draw on that big archetypal stuff as it helps you to expand your living space as a human. And that means you choose which workshops you go to and which books you read. And if it starts feeling overwhelming, you put the book down and you skip the next workshop. The word we use for this is regulation. And it's really a process of regulating how much of any type of these energies you can digest at a particular time. And only you know. And you have to get more empathic with yourself. Say, well now, am I going to too many workshops? Am I reading too many of this type of book? Is there something that's being left out of my life that would balance me if I did a little bit less of this and more of something else? Because it's all about balancing the opposites. And so I think that's an important kind of question you're asking. And we all have to deal with that. I can get totally lost in all that archetypal stuff. Well, that's a real mystery, isn't it? I mean, far be it from me to say that we don't have some karmic thing or some particular thing in our DNA that makes it harder for me than for you. I'd say that. But see, the thing about it is, this is where Paul Tillich is helpful in thinking about this type of thing, because he said, we're a multidimensional unity. And even if there is some karmic factor or some evolutionary hereditary factor, that is all brought into this mix that is you or me. And what we have to steward and care for is just that place where all of those dimensions come together, all the biological, the sociological, perhaps the karmic, whatever, the family history, the trauma history, all those things come in to a unity in you, and you have a certain modicum of freedom. In other words, this little old lady said to me, "Sonny, you just got to play the hand you've been dealt." Well, there is a freedom to play the hand that you've got. And that is the area of the wiggle room that I think Edinger is calling upon us to really be conscious about stewarding. Because I may not have as much room for movement as you do, but I've got some room. And I have to decide whether I'm going to use that room I have to respond to the larger psyche consciously or not. So I think the key is not so much what differentiates us individually, is that we have to realize that no matter what has happened to us, and no matter what some psychologists might say about how bad our prognosis is, we still have some freedom to move and to be transformed. Well, that whole parental thing is parents are mediators of these archetypal forces. They are sort of priests and priestesses of archetypal potentials. And one of the hardest things about growing out of our parental experience is getting a differentiation between the poor human person that the parent was, and the great archetypal thing that we thought they ought to be, or thought they were. So the parental thing is really mixed up with this archetypal thing in a real powerful way. So our challenge, is to remove these archetypal projections off those poor people that were our parents. And say, well, they seemed like they had a lot more ability than I thought, than they really did. In my mind, they had a lot more. They held it out on me. Truth is, most parents give what they can. Sometimes it's not much, like that. Absolutely. She's talking about that when you get past, if you're a caretaker, if you're the type of person that takes care of everybody else, I always say we give people what we need, but we never got. And she's has this insightful comment about that she realized that part of her persona was the nurturant one, but that she didn't really get much nurturing or didn't seem to be able to receive it. But that now, as she's worked on that, she's gotten more open to being open to the nurturance that comes through others and comes through her own psyche. I think that's exactly what he was talking about. The capacity to receive, because your cup is not, is not full. There's that kenosis idea of emptying. You can receive something. And this is particularly hard for us folks who want to take care of other people. I think it's really a trap for social clergy, social workers, psychologists, spiritual directors, mothers, fathers, people that feel that they are supposed to be taking care of others. And my experiences over the last, I guess, year and a half, been very similar to that, where I've finally realized that I need to ask some of my friends for help. I need to share with them more vulnerability, ask them for help. And that's not easy for a helping person type to do, so I think you're absolutely right. I still don't think that passive inflation is a very nice way to say that. It is more of an opening to that nurturing presence. It doesn't seem so inflated. I think it's a sense of your, Tillich would say, it's a sense of your participation in the sacramental aspect of being. You're participating in the divine. And it doesn't make you all puffed up. It doesn't make you inflated. But you have this sense that you're not cut off from the divine presence, that you're a participant in it. And it's a very different kind of way of being in the world. And so I think you're absolutely right. We're about out of time. I want to thank all of you for coming. And then keep an eye out. I will be trying to schedule a workshop day around Edinger's work on the New Dispensation. And we'll be looking at his ideas and asking the question, is there something in this Jungian tradition that really is a new dispensation? Or is that a kind of a Jungian inflation? Is that a Jungian tribal inflation? Or is there really something new about this that is important for the human spiritual life on earth?